Yo guys, welcome to the Zelda fiction. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto left Konoha and raised the Western Empire? Part 4. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. 3 years passed since the Akatsuki attack. Fu recovered from the heavy injuries she had sustained in the fight against Madara. She didn't even have any long-term problems with her reattached leg, thanks to the healing powers of her Biju. While Fu was unable to go on missions, Shino helped out as a regular jonin in the capital and occasionally participated in missions when teams needed an additional member. After half a year of recuperation and training to get back in shape, Fu re-entered active duty, and despite the risk, she and Shino rejoined the Anbu. Over the years, the empire managed to further consolidate its power. From its ninja academies graduated students that could easily compete with the students from the established academies of the ninja villages. While each of the elemental nations had been able to rely on the fact that they had far more trained ninja than the empire before, their supremacy was now dwindling. At the same time, shinobi with curse marks became a true menace. They supported smugglers, drug dealers and other criminal organizations in Earth Country, Lightning Country and Wind Country. They caused serious problems in the country's provinces, and some regions fell completely under the criminals' control until the local ninja village decided to clean up. Then the strange shinobi disappeared and reappeared somewhere else. Several groups of these mysterious shinobi had tried to enter the empire as well, but so far the empire's intelligence network and border patrols had prevailed. It helped, too, that the empire's citizens were extremely loyal to the government that had brought them peace, and criminal organizations were immediately reported. Unfortunately, nobody managed to track down the shinobi's base of operations. Naruto stood alone on a balcony of his palace and watched his children perform basic chakra control exercises in the courtyard under the supervision of one of his paths. He had a thoughtful, almost sad expression on his face. "Naruto? What is wrong?" He hadn't noticed that Hinata had entered the balcony behind him. "Can you believe we allowed Danzo free reign over Konoha for so many years?" "Naruto, you know Shikamaru was right. After our first assassination attempts, Konoha and especially the Hokage tower were turned into fortresses. We had to stop." "Yeah, but maybe we could have intervened sooner." She wrapped his arms around him from behind and leaned against him. "We weren't ready yet, Naruto. It would have been a bloodbath." Naruto nodded absent-mindedly. He had had these kinds of conversations before and knew all the arguments by heart. But he just needed confirmation once more. "And we really haven't overlooked something? Some way to avoid all bloodshed?" "No, Naruto. I don't think so." Naruto sighed. "And what about all our friends in Konoha? Tsunade, Bachin and Hirosenin? Your sister? We will make sure they all survive." The blonde relaxed visibly. "You're right, Hinata." Hinata kissed his cheek. "Of course I am." Naruto smiled. Hinata's shy and insecure nature still showed from time to time even after all these years, but when he needed support, he could always count on her. Hinata continued to talk, wrapping him closer in her arms at the same time. "In a bit more than 1 month is the meeting of the Kages we call together, and knowing how much they respect you, they won't stop us. Then we can march against Konoha directly with the help of Gaara, and we will make sure that there are as little casualties as possible." A smile played on Naruto's worried face. "And then Konoha will finally be free." Flashback. After the match between Hinata and Hanabi. Naruto, Hinata and Shikamaru had just arrived back at the Imperial Palace when the Nara dragged them into an empty room and put privacy seals up. "Alright, I want to know why you intentionally lost against Hanabi, Hinata." I don't know what you are talking about, Shikamaru. During the fight I was wondering why you seemed slower than usual and why you tired out so quickly. And then I saw how Naruto released his gravity seal in secret during your match. So please tell me, Hinata, why didn't you remove yours?" Hinata lowered her head and Naruto sighed. "It's like this, Shikamaru." Flashback end. It was the day of Hanabi's inauguration as the Hyuga clan head. Hanabi was dressed in the traditional ceremonial robes and was silently praying at the little shrine in the Hyuga compound. This was part of her inauguration and she had already managed to survive through a 2-hour-long tea ceremony. She had been so incredibly patient for so many years, but now the endless ceremonies were severely getting on her nerves. She wanted to be done with them already and be able to complete what she had worked for all this time. Her thoughts began to wander. Flashback. Hinata meets Hanabi during the escape of the clans from Konoha. It was a normal day in Hanabi's training schedule in the root training facility. Hanabi knew she didn't have anything to fear from the training. Her teachers just made sure she was disciplined and strong, and they didn't try to mess with her head and switch off her emotions. Her father had called in a favor to have her trained rather than give her up to Danzo, and she was most likely too old to be affected by their methods anyway. She still hadn't heard anything about her sister since she vanished so many months ago. This worried her to no end, but there wasn't anything she could do. Whenever she asked someone about Hinata they told her she was on an extended mission. But Hanabi knew that something was wrong since her team wasn't with her and she had disappeared on the day of Naruto's escape. Hanabi was in the middle of a training fight with one of her instructors when she heard the unmistakable sounds of real combat and screaming, which were coming closer to their room. Her instructors assumed positions in a wide half circle around the door. The door was kicked in with incredible force and in stormed a terrifying orange beast. The beast attacked Hanabi's instructors and tore them apart. It accidentally destroyed one of pillars holding up the ceiling and caused the ceiling in the middle of the room to begin to collapse, but the monster just continued to kill one rude instructor after the other. And then it suddenly stopped. The orange chakra surrounding it receded and there no longer stood a monster, but Hinata, her sister. She looked completely exhausted and Hanabi immediately saw that she couldn't fight anymore. The last surviving instructor had remained in front of Hanabi, shielding her. Now he made his way towards Hinata to finish the exhausted girl off. Hanabi activated her Byakugan, put her hand on the correct place on the man's back and pushed enough chakra into his heart to make it explode. Hinata looked at her in shock, while Hanabi remembered to quickly get rid of the body by throwing it under the slowly collapsing ceiling before making her way to her sister. Nisan. Hanabi hugged Hinata tight and for the first time in years she shed some tears. Amato. Hinata gently stroked through her sister's hair. Then she looked horrified at the corpses of the people she killed in such a brutal manner. I am sorry you had to see this, Hanabi. I just wanted to rescue you. It is alright Nisan. I am just glad to see you are alright. Hanabi suddenly burst into more tears. I was so worried. I didn't know what they had done to you and I couldn't find you. Hinata drew her sister closer. Shhh everything is fine now, Amato. Hanabi calmed down a bit and after a while she felt better. Nisan, what kind of power was that? Hinata's voice grew very quiet. I am the new Jinchuriki of the QP, Hanabi. Naruto had to transfer the fox to me to free me from the cursed seal. Ha. He really must be a great boyfriend if he did that to save you. I heard Jinchuriki normally die if they lose their tailed beast. So you don't think that I am a monster? Hanabi looked at her as if she had grown an additional head. You are not a monster. You are my Nisan. Thank you Hanabi. But Naruto isn't my boyfriend. Hanabi smiled at her. Make sure you show that idiot how much you like him so that he gets the hint, Nisan. I want you to be happy. Hinata lowered her head a bit and fiddled with her hands, but she smiled at the same time. Thank you. The sound of another part of the ceiling crashing down reminded Hinata that they were still in danger. Amato, Naruto is evacuating his friends and some of the clans from Konoha to the western regions. Please come with us. I am sorry Nisan, but I cannot do that. Hinata looked crushed, which hurt Hanabi a lot. But she knew that this was what she had to do. I promise to fulfill your dream to change our clan, and just like you, I will not go back on my word either. Now Hinata stared at her sister with open eyes. I hope you succeed. I just want the Hyuga to be one family again. She lowered her head. The one who put the curse mark on me was father. Please be careful Hanabi. Her sister nodded. She wasn't exactly surprised about this revelation about her parent. The younger Hyuga now got increasingly nervous that someone might see them and realize she was just pretending to be the obedient little heiress. She gave her sister one last hug. Sorry Nisan, but I have got to go. Hanabi detached herself from her sister, turned around and ran right through the area where the ceiling collapsed while dodging falling rubble and managed to get to the other side of the room. Flashback end. Hanabi smiled inwardly because of the memory. It had been the only time she had ever taken off her mask and confiding in her sister had felt incredibly good and taken a huge burden off her. And it had once again assured her in her wish to change her clan. Usually it would be impossible to enforce anything against the will of the Elder Council, but there was an exception. The very first order of a new clan head was to be implemented without anyone having the right to object to it. This rule had brought some important changes to the Hyuga and it had possibly been the only reason why the Hyuga didn't perish because of stagnation. She continued with the ceremonies, but the motions were so ingrained in her that she could allow her thoughts to wander again. Flashback. The 4-year-old Hanabi was happily playing with her sister in the gardens of the Hyuga compound. Their ball rolled through a few bushes and behind a building and Hanabi went to get it. She found it under an open window, grabbed it and was about to walk away when she heard voices. You have to understand our position here Hiashi. Hinata is far too soft, she must not become clan head under any circumstances. Hanabi froze and remained as quiet as she could. Next she heard the voice of her father. Hinata may be a lost cause, but with a bit of discipline, Hanabi could still become a respectable clan head. Of course. She is still young. But if she doesn't change we have to take action. You know that one of your children is bound to become clan head by tradition, if you have any. Don't you dare lecture me. I always put our clan above all else, even my daughters. If Hanabi doesn't change we will get rid of them both." 10 minutes later Hinata found her sister. She was crying under a tree in the gardens. Hinata wanted to console her, but Hanabi swatted her hand away and stormed off. Flashback end. That day had been the end of the old joyful Hanabi and the birth of the new cold and disciplined heiress. A single tear ran down Hanabi's face when she remembered how she had treated her sister to keep up appearances. Hanabi quickly wiped it away before anyone saw it. Half an hour later the ceremonies were finally over. Hiashi declared her to be the new clan head in front of the elder council, and after that she made their way to the biggest courtyard in the compound, followed by the elders, to be introduced to the branch family as their new clan head. The courtyard was filled by members of the branch family of all ages as they waited for their new clan head to make her inauguration speech. Hanabi stepped in front of all of them confidently. After everything had quieted down she began. "I am Hanabi Hyuga, new clan head of the Hyuga clan." The members of the branch house were anything but excited. To them she was just a new face for their leader, while the elder council would continue to hold the real power. In addition to that she hadn't exactly been very kind to the members of the branch family in her overall behavior. "My first act as clan head is not to enforce something new, but to go back to the traditional ways of our honorable clan." The groan went through the members of the branch family. They suspected that some stupid old tradition was about to be unburied. 200 years ago a new custom was introduced to the Hyuga that weakens our great clan to this day. This sparked some low whispers among the crowd as they wondered what she meant. 200 years ago a new custom was introduced that split our clan, our family, and turned most of us into slaves. The cage bird seal was introduced as a way to protect our bloodline, while in reality it is just a way to enslave those that bear it. For a moment there was complete silence as everyone stared at her in shock. Hanabi Hyuga stopped this at once. "I forbid it." That was the voice of her father. She ignored him. "I, Hanabi Hyuga, head of the Hyuga clan decree, as my first act as clan head to remove the Hyuga cursed seal from all members of the branch family. Our family shall no longer be divided into slaves and masters. Therefore putting that seal on anyone is from now on to be considered an act of slavery and punishable by death." There were actually some cheers among the usually very dignified crowd of Hyuga. "I know about the necessity to protect our bloodline, and we will ask the seal masters of the village to create a new seal without the ability to control its bearer. But this new seal will be put on the whole Hyuga clan and not only the branch family." The new clan head smiled encouragingly towards the big group of Hyugas. "Now step forward so that elders and I can undo your seals." An excited boy, about 9 years old, immediately ran forward and stopped right in front of her. Hanabi smiled at him. Then she took a kunai from her pockets, slashed her thumb and put her bloody finger on the youth's forehead. With a few one-handed hand signs of her other hand, she performed the secret jutsu she had found in her clan's library. The boy cringed a bit as he felt the seal dissolve, but when it was gone he smiled happily, hugged Hanabi, and then ran towards his parents. Nobody had tried to get their seal removed from the elders so far, but Hanabi had expected this. She put her hand on the forehead of the next branch member when someone swatted her hand away. It was her father. "This farce ends now." Hanabi glared at him. "There is nothing you can do, father. By law and customs of the Hyuga clan, nobody can object to a clan head's first decision. You are not the clan head, Hanabi. You are a failure just like your sister." The young Hyuga would have laughed in her father's face if this matter wasn't too important. She had spent so many years of her life just for this moment and she wasn't going to let it all just be taken away. "Father, please trust me, this is for the good of the clan. Once our families are united we will be stronger." "No, Hanabi, my blinded child. You are hurting this clan more than you know. I have to stop you." Hanabi's voice got an icy tone. "Father, if you stop me now you would go against one of the most sacred traditions of our clan. You would throw away your honor that you hold in such high regards just for the feeling to have power over this people. It would make you a hypocrite." Her father's face became really thoughtful for a while and Hanabi hoped she had managed to convince him. But then his expression turned hard again. "Hanabi Hyuga, for pretending to be the Hyuga clan head and attempting to start a rebellion against the council of elders, we put you under arrest." Hanabi now had tears in her eyes as she wondered how this could have happened. "Take her away." Hanabi noticed that the members of the branch family stepped close to her. But in her upset state she didn't realize that they were shielding her instead of apprehending her. Then 5 of the branch members attacked the elders and they were immediately stopped as their curse marks activated. But the elders didn't stop there and everyone could see they were about to kill the attackers to make an example out of them. This brought Hanabi back to reality. "No." With a scream she threw herself against the elders and managed to kill 3 of them before she was surrounded and incapacitated. She never noticed that others had followed her charge as well. 3 hours later Danzo stared in disbelief at the Anbu who had finished his report about the events at the Hyuga compound. The fact that Hanabi Hyuga had fooled them all was a surprise, but it was something he could have dealt with. She might have been a tough opponent during council meetings, unlike the other current clan heads, but she still would have had to obey her Hokage. But what Hiashi Hyuga had done was inexcusable. 30 members of the branch family and 3 elders had died during the short revolt. They had for the most part been shinobi in their best years, even 4 Anbu were among them. In just one day they had lost 2/3 of the clan's active shinobi. Hiruzen would have probably arrested Hiashi and the rest of the Hyuga Elder Council immediately and reinstated Hanabi as clan head, but Danzo couldn't do this. He couldn't risk to further weaken the clan. Danzo stormed out of the office and headed to the dungeons in the village's prison. He needed something, or someone rather, to vent his anger. 3 days later. A terrible sandstorm blew through the Tsunade Desert. Normally even the most experienced shinobi squads would seek shelter under these conditions, but the group of genin under the command of Jonin Jun Hishimari had found tracks in the sand right before the storm hit them. Jun had seen immediately from the distance between the tracks that the person must have been a shinobi. Now they had zero visibility thanks to the storm, and Jun hoped the person they had been chasing had stopped and looked for shelter. He was certain of his ability to keep going in one direction even under these conditions, but if their target wandered off track, they had no way to find him or her. In the next moment Jun almost stepped on a body lying face first in the sand. Jun gave a signal and his genin immediately started building a shelter against the storm. The jonin took a closer look at the stranger. He was definitely male even though he had long dark hair and he was dressed in some kind of kimono. Jun turned him around and saw the signs of dehydration and terrible sunburns on his face, but he was still alive. Around his forehead was a Konoha headband. Jun wondered what had driven this shinobi to come to the desert so unprepared. As soon as shinobi grabbed for his water bottle, uncorked it and poured the liquid into the stranger's mouth. The man slowly came to and coughed up sand and water. Jun waited till he was done and then gave him more to drink, which the stranger swallowed greedily. When the bottle was empty Jun put it away and tried to get some information. The man however was visibly close to lose in his efforts to stay awake, so Jun slapped his face a few times to keep him conscious. "Who are you?" "Niji Hayu." "Hyuga. I can see that thanks to your eyes. What is your business here in Suna, Hyuga? Konoha shinobi aren't exactly welcome here anymore." "Need to SSSSSHN nada." Niji groaned and lost consciousness. The experienced Jonin's face became thoughtful. "Sensei, do you know what he wants?" "Of course. He wants to speak to someone specific. I know only one former Hyuga that lives outside of Konoha and to our luck her first name is Hinata." The eyes of 2 members of his genin squad went wide as they realized who their sensei was talking about. The third one had no clue. "Who is she?" Jun sighed because of the boy's lack in general knowledge. "The Empress of the Western Empire." In the Kazekage residence in Suna Kankuro made his way to the room of the ambassador of the Western Empire. Kankuro shortly knocked on the door before pushing down the handle and trying to open it. But the door was locked. Kankuro knocked. "Hey great ambassador, you there?" For a short while there was silence. Then Kankuro felt some shift in nearby chakra and he was sure that a sound barrier had just been disabled. Finally he heard the voice of Shikamaru shouting from the other side of the door, who had spent quite a bit of time in Suna in the last few months. "What is it Kankuro?" "I am busy. We found a leaf shinobi in the desert, possibly deserted from Konoha. He wants to speak to your empress." "I will talk to him tomorrow." "It is Niji Hyuga." Kankuro heard Shikamaru curse loudly and mumble apologies. Then he heard the rustling of clothes. After that Shikamaru's voice rang through the door again. "Where is he?" "In the hospital. He is unconscious at the moment after coming into the desert completely unprepared. He was lucky that one of our scouting teams found him in time or he would have died out there." 2 minutes later the door swung open and Shikamaru stormed out while straightening his jacket underway. He just ran past Kankuro and down the corridor, presumably making his way towards the hospital as fast as possible. Kankuro looked into the room and grinned at his sister, who was still busy putting her clothes back on. "Well, were your negotiations successful, Tamari?" "Shut it, Kankuro." Tamari's look promised pain, so Kankuro quickly made his escape. But on his face was a huge grin as he imagined how well he could tease his sister from now on. The Empire's most important family sat side by side at the new Ichiraku's raiment stand. 2 members of the family slurped down their ramen greedily, while the other 2 showed much more dignity. The Uzumakis were celebrating the fact that their 2 youngest members had managed to perform the Henge no Jutsu. The transformation jutsu allowed them to eat in peace now, and it was going to allow the twins to spend time with other children their age unnoticed in the future. Naruto finished his 3rd bowl of ramen, Hitomi her 2nd, and Hinata and Minato were still occupied with their first bowls. Suddenly Naruto's eyes went wide and he simply vanished. Hinata blinked. It was definitely unusual for Naruto to teleport away without a word, even if there was an emergency. Unsure what to do, Hinata waited, and sure enough Naruto reappeared 10 minutes later, no longer disguised by a hinge. Luckily there were no other customers in the raiment stand. "Naruto, what is wrong?" "It is Neji. I just brought him into the hospital. He looks really bad, his face heavily burnt. But Shikamaru said he will be live. Shizune-san is with him right now." "How? Why is Neji Niasen here?" "I don't know. I'll take you to him immediately." Hinata nodded and Naruto addressed the twins. "Hitomi, Minato, your parents have to go to the hospital. If you want you can finish your dinner here and our clones will take you back home after that. Maybe you can visit Uncle Neji later when he wakes up." The children nodded and Naruto and Hinata quickly created one clone each. Then Hinata put her arms around him. "Thanks for the meal, Tuchi-san and Am-san. Children, be good." And with that Emperor and Empress vanished. Hinata spent the next hour at the side of her sleeping cousin while Naruto went to speak with Shikamaru. A while later he returned, a contemplative look on his face. This didn't go unnoticed by Hinata. "Naruto. Shikamaru thinks that Neji ran away from Konoha. Otherwise he would have at least had a team with him. Additionally, if this had been an official operation, Neji would have been properly prepared to survive in the desert." Hinata thought about this for a while and then nodded. "I think that is the only logical explanation. But for Neji Niasen to do that, I wonder what happened." "Yeah, but it also means that his life is in danger. So let me take a look at this." Naruto removed the Konoha headband from the unconscious Uchiha and unveiled his caged bird seal. Naruto had been unable to remove Hinata's seal a few years ago, but since then he had come a long way. "I am quite sure I can remove this thing in a proper sealing room, given a few hours' time." Hinata nodded. What Naruto was referring to was a room where he could draw seals on the floor and possibly even the walls. These rooms were used when the surface area on a person's skin simply wasn't enough to draw the necessary seals. Hinata knew that for Naruto to estimate several hours of work despite his skills with sealing techniques and shadow clones, this had to be a very complicated procedure. But luckily I am quite certain that there is an easier way. I firmly believe that the key to unlock the seal is right here." "What do you mean?" "I think with the proper technique an unsealed Uchiha can release the caged bird seal." "You mean I can remove it?" "Well yeah, if we knew the correct hand signs. But I think I can help you circumvent that step." Naruto produced his sealing equipment and drew a small seal on Neji's forehead, surrounding the caged bird seal. "Now just push a bit of chakra into the seal." "Are you sure about this, Naruto?" Hinata knew that by messing with the seal, there was a chance that either the Byakugan was immediately sealed or worse, the pain or even death trigger were activated. "Yes, I am sure." Hinata verified by looking at him that Naruto wasn't too nervous. She put her hand on Neji's forehead and poured chakra into the seal. Naruto's seal surrounding the caged bird seal glowed shortly before dissolving. A few seconds later the cursed seal started disappearing as well. Neji showed no reaction like pain, and by shortly pulling up his eyelids, Naruto confirmed that his eyes were undamaged. "Yada." After Hinata saw that everything had went well, she captured Naruto in a tight hug. "Thank you for saving him, Naruto." Anything for you." They stayed a bit like that until they heard a quiet moan from behind them. "Neji Niasen." Tenten entered the council room where almost always one of Naruto's paths was busy managing his nation. She had just returned from a mission during which she assassinated one of the Empire's lords, who had been planning a coup. After entering the large chamber she made her way towards the middle of the room and shortly bowed towards the path who was currently in charge. "My Emperor." "Hello, Dragon. I have accomplished my mission and would like to give a full report." "That can wait. I have a new mission for you and you have to take care of immediately. Please inform my friend Tenten that her former teammate Neji has defected from the Leaf and is now in our care." Tenten stared at him in disbelief. "He is stationed in our central hospital and still unconscious, but Shizune thinks he will wake up soon. Please bring Tenten this information as fast as possible." "Oh, of course. Right away." The young Anbu captain actually ran towards the exit of the room, forgetting her usually calm and dignified demeanor while being in her dragon persona. The path looked after her with an amused smile. It took one more hour for Neji to fully wake up. Meanwhile all members of the former Konoha 12, who were now living in the Empire, had gathered in the hospital. Everyone was happy to see Neji again. In addition to his cousin Hinata, his former teammate Tenten was especially moved. After Neji was feeling well enough he told his story to the whole group. Hinata grabbed onto Naruto for support as she heard how her sister's plans and hopes had been crushed by her father. Then Neji told them how he had escaped the compound after Hanabi had been taken down and that luckily nobody noticed him missing due to the confusion and the huge amount of dead branch family members. He lowered his head in shame, looking depressed. Tenten was sitting on his bed and she put her hand on his shoulders to support him. I am sorry Hinata-sama. I failed to protect both you and your sister. What? No way this was your fault Niji. This was all because of that asshole Hiashi. Naruto stopped himself before ending that sentence and glanced at his wife. Even though Hinata hadn't been overly fond of the man, he was still her father. Naruto, you don't need worry about hurting my feelings in this case. That man is no longer my father and he will pay for this. There was some approving murmurs from the group, but the mood remained grim. Well, at least we managed to get rid of your caged bird seal. Naruto grinned at the others. With that elephant out of the room, everyone relaxed a bit and Tenten hugged Niji, happy that he would be fine. After the commotion died down, Shizune threw them out of Niji's room to allow him to rest some more. Naruto had a few short conversations with some of his friends. When he noticed Hinata was nowhere nearby, he went to find her. After a few minutes he found her alone in a room close to Niji's, just staring out of the window. Naruto approached her and put one arm on her shoulder from behind. You want to save your sister, right? Hinata just nodded. I'll get Shikamaru and we will figure something out. Don't worry, we will get your sister out of there. The young emperor let go of Hinata and was about to go and fetch their best strategist when she stopped him by grabbing his hand. Naruto, we both know that preparing something like this takes time. Weeks or months of planning and scouting. I am afraid of what they will do to her in that time. They might even execute her because they need someone to take the blame for the massacre. And what about our invasion plans? Hinata took a deep breath. Maybe we can act faster somehow. She looked at him with pleading eyes. Wait. Are you asking me to just go with you to Konoha, break into the village and get your sister out of there? Hinata froze. Only now she realized what her request entailed. Going unprepared to Konoha was a complete suicide mission and she and Naruto would have to take part in it to give it any chance of success. Sounds like a great plan. They won't even know what hit them. Naruto, we cannot do this. No. If both of us go to Konoha, there is a good chance that we do not make it back. We cannot risk Hitomi and Minato having to grow up without their parents. And what about your nation? I'm sorry I brought this up. Naruto stared at Hinata and he could practically see how things would turn out. Konoha would hold on to Hanabi either as an important hostage or the one guilty for the Hyuga massacre. And once they tried to attack the village or free Hanabi, she would simply die. Hinata would put up a brave face and pretend she was alright, but it would take a long time until she really was her old self again, if ever. This was the most logical outcome of the situation, it was fate and Naruto despised it. Hinata. Naruto put his arms around her again. Hinata, I think this time you have to be selfish and risk everything, or you will forever regret that you didn't try to save your sister. And I swore to always be by your side, so I am coming with you, of course. Naruto, I still don't think we should do that. I think I can somehow bear with this, but not with abandoning our children. Naruto contemplated this, grabbed Hinata's hand and dragged her into the room where he knew their children were waiting. He signaled the two shadow clones watching over them to leave and addressed his daughter. Hey Hitomi. What would you do if some evil people took away your brother? Hitomi thought about this for only a second and put on a determined face. I would kick their butts and free him, of course. And what would you do, Minato, if someone kidnapped your sister? The same. See Hinata, our children think we should do this. Naruto. That's not the same. Shush love, it is exactly the same. Then Naruto addressed his children. Mom and Dad have to go and save your mother's little sister. Hinata stared at him while Naruto quickly gave both his children a hug. Then Hinata shook herself out of her stupor and kissed the forehead of each of her children. We will come back. I promise. Naruto nodded towards her. We will have to dispel our shadow clones and paths eventually to make this work, but don't worry. We will be back in a day or two and then you can get to know your Aunt Hanabi. Naruto grinned. Believe it? His two children nodded and Hinata bonked him on the head playfully. Then Naruto called their shadow clones back in to look after their children, grabbed onto Hinata and teleported them away. Naruto and Hinata appeared in a large room located in the basement of the Imperial Palace. It was an armory, filled to the brim with weapons, armor and other combat gear. Should we take anyone else with us? Hinata shook her head. No, they would slow us down, and you can easily get one additional person to safety with your Hiraishin, but not two. Alright. Then let's grab the best armor and all the weapons we need. They rummaged through the supplies in the armory and both began to change out of their normal gear into sturdy battle armor. Feels a bit nostalgic, just like going on a mission. Hinata nodded. I feel like Kurenai-sensei is going to scold me because I am not following orders. Heh. It's not like anyone could order you around now. But to be honest, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near Shikamaru when he learns about this. Hinata sighed. Once we are away, one of your shadow clones should inform him about the situation. He needs to come up with an explanation why there won't be any of your paths and clones running around for a while. Oh yeah, wouldn't want to cause a panic. But what could we tell the public? Maybe a training incident. You completely overexhausting yourself. It may be slightly detrimental for your reputation, but I don't think anyone would believe to be used as a cover-up story. Heh. That does sound believable. After they had both helped each put on their armor and then gathered their respective gear, they met back in the center of the room. Are we really doing the right thing, Naruto? Well, you did promise our children that we will be back. So there is no problem. Hinata's facial expression changed from confusion into a small smile and then into determination. Because we always keep our promises. You are right. Naruto grinned at her. Of course I am. Ready. Hinata nodded and grabbed onto Naruto. The young emperor teleported them to the teleportation seal in the city and from there to a hidden seal in Tsunade territory next to the border of Fire Country. Naruto and Hinata were moving towards Konoha using the fastest way possible. Just as he had done just 5 minutes before, Naruto addressed his wife. Hinata, I want to try something else. Hinata didn't even look towards him as she had to keep her eyes forward to not run into the next tree. They were going fast enough that a collision would have squashed any normal person. Instead she just grimaced and Naruto noticed the telltale signs that he had accomplished the almost impossible task of annoying his wife. Just give up, Naruto, and don't be such a baby. Naruto just nodded not to make things worse, which made Hinata smile gently again. I promise you I won't tell anyone about this. Besides, this promise didn't really help repair his broken pride. He was significantly slower than Hinata when she used Kurama's power and using the Hiraishin was not really an option. He had tried repeatedly throwing Hiraishin kunai in front of him and teleporting towards them, but this method wasn't that much faster than Hinata and it used tons of chakra. In the end he had complied with using the most effective approach. Hinata was carrying him piggyback. Naruto decided to just accept his fate. How are we going to break into Konoha? I don't think we should try anything too complicated. Let us just create a diversion and break into the village during the confusion. Naruto nodded. Maybe we can even sabotage their defenses a bit in preparation for the invasion. Hinata took a while to contemplate this. If we could do long-term damage like destroying military structures and taking down key personnel, that might help, even with the invasion still being more than a month away. She looked as in thought for a moment and bit her lip. Naruto, do we aim to kill? Naruto stared ahead, not focusing on anything, while Hinata continued to quickly jump from tree to tree. A few years earlier he would just have yelled hell no. But now he was painfully aware that each Konoha shinobi could potentially kill multiple of their own people. Especially once they acted upon their invasion plans. We will finish off each of Danzo's men we managed to identify. Let's try to go for long-time injuries rather than kills for anyone else. But don't hold back too much. If we want this to be a success, we have to hit them hard. Killing some of them is unavoidable. Later. Anbu Konohamaru Sarutobi arrived at the walls of Konoha and landed next to the single Chunin stationed on top of it. Report. Everything is quiet, there is no activity on this side of the wall. Hearing some sound, the Chunin turned around and saw dozens of ninja arriving at the wall and even more coming towards them from inside of the village. What is going on? Our outer defensive perimeter has been breached by foreign chakra signatures. Hundreds of them. The Chunin stared at him in disbelief. There had been no indication of an incoming attack. Hell, they were at peace. Who could be attacking them? Soon the battlements were completely filled with Konoha shinobi and everyone anxiously awaited the arrival of the mysterious enemy. What they saw next caused everyone on the wall to hold their breaths. A giant tidal wave of water came rolling out of the forest towards the wall, carrying smaller trees and boulders with it. The defenders could only somewhat prepare by grabbing onto the wall. The giant structure shook as the wave hit it and a few defenders were thrown down into Konoha by the shock wave. But the wall withstood the impact. After they had recovered, the Konoha shinobi saw hundreds of black and orange-clad figures approaching the wall, running towards them. Konohamaru only hesitated a fraction of a second when seeing his former friend before he sprang into action. Stop them. He formed a hand seal, and 10 copies of himself popped into existence. Then each of them grabbed a few kunai, and all of the defenders started raining down steel on the clones. Hundreds were destroyed, but they just kept coming. When they were close enough, they jumped up the wall, threw a couple of 3-pronged kunai at the defenders. First, the hailstorm of kunai killed several of the more inexperienced shinobi, and then the clones were upon them. A chaotic melee broke out on the wall. As Konohamaru disposed of shadow clone after shadow clone, he noticed how all the water that had washed against the wall now flowed back in the direction of the forest, forming another giant wave, almost as big as the first one. He shuddered after thinking what amount of chakra would be necessary to achieve something like this. But then he had to focus back to his current situation as 5 new Naruto copies attacked him. Since the defenders were busy holding off the wave of clones, they failed to notice the 10 additional Narutos approaching the wall. Each of them had slitted eyes, with an orange hue and a giant blue ball of energy in their hands. In times of war, the wall would be continuously reinforced with chakra, making it nearly impenetrable. But the Sealing Squad didn't have enough time to prepare, and so the wall remained vulnerable. The wall shook again as the clones pushed the blue glowing spheres into it, and this time it cracked and crumbled wherever the giant Rasengans hit it. The clones joined the battle on top of the wall, and then the next tidal wave of water washed against Konoha's defenses. The giant wall broke in each of the locations the Rasengans had weakened beforehand. Most of the fighters managed to get themselves to safety, but some fell and were washed away with the flood or crushed by the crumbling wall. As the water flooded into the village, it widened the gaps in the wall more and more as chunks of it were swept away and the houses right next to it were flooded. Some collapsed from the power of the water alone, and some were destroyed by the debris from the wall. Konohamaru engaged one of the clones with the strange eyes, who had weakened the wall, and he soon realized that they were on a completely different level from the normal ones. He dodged a punch that shattered stone and created a few more shadow clones of his own to take on his enemy. As he quickly surveyed their situation when his clones engaged the powerful enemy, he cursed. Running from the direction of the forest came 12 figures. 6 of them he identified as Naruto clones with metal rods sticking out of several parts of their bodies and wine-colored eyes. Konohamaru had briefed about the powers of the Rinnegan, and he was not looking forward to a fight with the paths. The other 6 figures he identified as Hinata, his old friend's wife, whom he had only seen in the bingo book up till now. Each of her clones was surrounded by bright yellow chakra, and the young Tsuratobi could feel the power of the Nine Tails oozing from them. He knew one thing. The Konoha shinobi needed reinforcements, and they needed them fast. One of the Hiraishin kunai thrown by the clone army had landed in a small civilian house close to the wall. The real Naruto and Hinata appeared inside of it in a blink. Using this trick, they had managed to infiltrate the village unnoticed so far, but were still very close to the battle. They transformed into a civilian-looking couple. Naruto took on the appearance of a middle-aged brown-haired man, and Hinata transformed into a blonde housewife. Since Naruto needed to keep his Rinnegan active and couldn't hide his eyes, he took out a previously prepared piece of cloth with fake blood on it. He kept his head lowered and put the cloth over his eyes to pretend an injury. Then Hinata grabbed his arm and led him out of the house. They followed the swarm of civilians running from the battle, wading knee-deep through water for the first couple of 100 meters. Even though they met several shinobi on the way, they managed to hide their chakra well enough that they didn't notice them during the confusion. When they reached the center of the village, they stole away from the stream of civilians into a small alley. Nobody noticed them as they made their way towards the Anbu headquarters, which contained the holding cells for shinobi in Konoha and its lower levels. Due to the attack, the place was completely deserted, and Naruto and Hinata could just walk up to the entrance. The security seals in place were no match for the couple. They were mainly designed to reliably inform the garrison shinobi about intruders, but unfortunately the Uzumakis didn't care about that. A single Rasengan courtesy of Naruto blew open the doors, and the two made their way inside. Naruto's paths had managed to fight their way through the village to the base of the Hokage tower, leaving a trail of destruction behind them. But now they had a huge problem. Words and symbols were etched deeply into the stone spiraling up the tower. The whole protection seals had been improved by Jiraiya several times to the point that they were almost impenetrable. To the somewhat chakra-seeing Rinnegan eyes, the walls themselves were glowing with power, with the seals standing out even more. This kind of security was in a completely other dimension than the Anbu headquarters. The human path shook his head dejectedly after inspecting the seals closely. There is no way we break this in less than a couple of hours. The group of Narutos looked at each other, unsure what to do. So what now? But someone else answered this question for them. Suddenly a black vortex appeared right in the elemental path's face and ripped half of it into oblivion. The path vanished immediately, as well as the elementals he had summoned and had still been fighting over at the wall. Before the paths could organize a defense, a green blur appeared between them. The Asura path barely managed to block a vicious axe kick with his metal-enforced arms, but the blow threw him backward several hundred meters, and he only stopped by crashing into a nearby building. Kakashi, Hokage and Might Guy had entered the fray and immediately continued their attack. At the same time, the Asura path struggled to get back into the fray when a long white mane suddenly entangled him from behind. He had just enough time to turn his skin metallic before the hair grew hard and tried to pierce him like thousands of needles. The path quickly turned his left arm into a blade to cut his way free and get some distance between himself and his former sensei Jiraiya. The human path was supporting the other paths in battle when he felt the sharp pain of a katana being shoved right through his chest from behind, the blade breaking through his ribsage. Blood spewed from the wound in abandon, and he felt the blade being turned around painfully for him. He realized too late that this had to be an illusion, and then he was suddenly pierced by a scorching lance of lightning right through the chest in reality and vanished in a puff of smoke. On a nearby building stood Sasuke Uchiha, Sharingan blazing and katana in hand. The remaining paths knew that with Naruto withholding chakra from the men the original not being there, this fight was a foregone conclusion. But they still had to stall these enemies for as long as possible. Naruto and Hinata made their way into the basement of the Anbu headquarters. The few shinobi left to defend the place didn't even pose a threat. They were surprised to find an enemy who used something that resembled a cursed seal, but they quickly dispatched of him as they had more pressing concerns. At some point Naruto shuddered slightly and told Hinata about his new opponents, but they simply carried on as fast as possible. Finally they arrived in the lowest part of the building, with cells specialized in holding shinobi. Hinata had spent almost a year in one of those, and the memory of being chained to a wall with chakra inhibitors for what felt like an eternity still caused her nightmares from time to time. Due to her Byakugan, she quickly found what she was looking for. She broke into a small sprint along the many cells lining along the corridor and activated Kurama's powers to rip her sister's confinements apart. She never realized that Naruto had stopped following her at some point as bent the powerful metal bars and entered the cell of her sister. 2 minutes later she was back in the corridor, carrying her unconscious teenage sister in her arms. Hinata finally noticed that Naruto had remained standing in front of another cell, staring into it blankly. A single one of Hinata's shadow clones was still alive at this point. She had fought an Anbu, who, surprisingly to her, had activated a cursed seal to match her strength. But that of course had triggered her to fight him even more viciously. Using the Bijuu chakra given to her, she quickly overpowered her opponent, who ran away when it was obvious that he was beaten. She had pursued him through Konoha, and now he lay dead at her feet in a small alley with several kunai embedded into his back. The clone had now spent all of her chakra, and she was close to simply dispelling herself, since there was nothing she could do from now on. Kiba-kun. Hinata, is that you? I am a shadow clone, but it's still me, Kiba-kun. He shook his head. There is no way you are Hinata. The Hinata I know would never attack Konoha like this and kill so many people. Hinata looked to ground in shame, her old shy side showing for a second. Kiba continued. How many of our shinobi did you and that idiot injure or kill? And why did he have to use that giant wave? I wonder how many civilians died in their homes after it broke the wall and carried chunks of it into the village. Hinata looked up, right into his eyes. Naruto is not very good with water-based jutsu. That wave was controlled by me. It was the best way to destroy the wall. Kiba stared at her. Why? Kiba-kun is a shinobi. You should be aware that sometimes we have to make harsh decisions to reach our goals. As much as we would like to, we cannot protect everyone. Kiba remained silent, still not believing how much his former teammate had changed. I had to save my sister after my father slaughtered half of my clan and pinned it on her. And the reason why we brought down the wall. She sighed. Konoha will find out anyways once the Beepais are attacked. We will invade Konoha to finally end Danzo's control over the village. But hundreds, maybe thousands, will die, yes. She looked at him with sad eyes. Kiba, I wish things were different, but we have to bring down Danzo or things will just get worse. Please don't hate me. You were going on about the old hawk the last time we spoke too. Are you sure about your accusations? Yes. Danzo has manipulated the Hokage since you and the others went after Sasuke. I believe you. Hinata looked at him with surprise. She hadn't dared to hope things would go this well. I may not be the sharpest guy around, but even I have noticed that the Hokage has made some questionable decisions and that she and the council has been lying to us about a lot of things. I will no longer support them. The Empress smiled brightly at her former teammate. Hinata, is there a way to prevent the invasion from happening? She shook her head. Not as long Danzo is alive. Then maybe it's time I show everyone why I am going to be a much more awesome Hokage than that knucklehead Naruto could have ever been. I'll end Danzo's reign. Hinata smiled at her former teammate good-heartedly. She knew very well how competitive Kiba was and that Naruto's success must have been nagging at his pride. But at the same time she was very worried, too. She wasn't sure if Kiba would be able to achieve his goal. And even if he did, the chance of him dying even after taking down Danzo was high. Of course, Kiba-kun. But please be careful. Naruto and I weren't able to find a way to take him down without using a full-scale invasion. And we are certain he is hiding a Sharingan under his bandaged eye. In addition to that, he has some kind of technique with which he can at least feign his death very convincingly. Thanks Hinata. Now I cannot fail. Please don't die, Kiba-kun. You know me, Hinata. I am not going down easily. Meanwhile both heard the sound of approaching footsteps and Hinata quickly gave the Inyazuka one last hug. Goodbye and good luck. Kiba returned the hug, but soon the footsteps were so close that the Hinata clone dispelled herself to not endanger him. Within the Anbu headquarters, Hinata slowly made her way back to Naruto with her sister in her arms. Naruto was trying to talk to the person in the cell who was still hidden from Hinata's view. Sakura-chan. Hinata couldn't believe her ears. Sakura. It's me, Naruto. Please wake up. Hinata finally reached Naruto and sure enough. There in the cell was Sakura Haruno. Just like Hanabi, she was shackled to the wall and she was looking disheveled. Hinata quickly handed Hanabi over to Naruto and used Kurama's powers to break open the cell. Then Naruto handed the girl back and stepped into the cell. Sakura. What are you doing here? What happened to you? Unfortunately, they didn't immediately manage to wake up the pink-haired woman. Naruto and Hinata freed her from her shackles, and then Naruto used the Hiraishin to get one after another to the teleportation seal his clones had prepared outside of the village. Shortly after they arrived, Sakura woke up. Naruto. No, you aren't real, you can't be. I must be dreaming. Sakura, it's really me. Hinata and I freed you from the prison. Suddenly the young woman lunged for him and pulled him close to her. Naruto, I'm so sorry. I did terrible things to you for no reason at all. Can you ever forgive me? Naruto did his best to calm down his former teammate. He had never seen Sakura like this, she was a complete wreck. Sakura-san, what happened to you? Are your children safe? As soon as the words had left Hinata's mouth, Sakura's face contorted in terror and she started sobbing. They took them from me, they took my children. After glancing towards his wife and getting her permission by a silent nod, Naruto took Sakura in his arms and let her cry into his shoulder. After a few minutes he asked. Who did that, Sakura? Who took your children? Danzo and a small sob escaped the girl's lips and Sasuke. It took a while until Sakura managed to tell them the full story. Sakura had given birth to Katsu Uchiha and she spent some time to describe to them what a beautiful boy he was and how happy she had been to have him. But the boy had pink hair just like her sister, and Sasuke refused to acknowledge him as an Uchiha. They had broken up over the ensuing arguments, but Sakura had been quite content with leaving her fall in love, hoping that the breakup would maybe open the Uchiha's eyes. But that hadn't happened, and Sasuke had even taken a new wife, a redhead even. Sakura didn't know where the girl had come from, but Karen Uchiha was just as devoted to Sasuke as she herself had been just a few years prior. The strange decision to go for another girl with special hair was encouraged by Danzo, who had succeeded in convincing Sasuke due to the girl's bloodline. Sakura hadn't really cared at that point. She had stopped working as a ninja and concentrated on earning money in the Konoha hospital and use all her free time to raise her kids. Her parents helped her out by looking after the children whenever she was at work. But one day Danzo had stood on her front porch and demanded her to hand her children over for them to be trained as ninja. Sakura had refused to hand one 2-year-old son and 5-year-old daughter over, and after Danzo had shown her a permit signed by the Hokage and tried to get past her, she fought. The old hawk and his bodyguards underestimated her, and after an earth-shattering punch, she managed to escape her home together with her children. She knew she had no chance of escaping the village, especially with her children, and so she went to seek for help. Flashback. Sasuke. Sakura had found Sasuke at a small training ground at the Uchiha compound. She quickly put her children down, went the last few meters over to Sasuke and got on her knees. Sasuke, please help me. What is going on, Sakura? What are you doing here? Danzo. Danzo is trying to take Katsu and Makoto from me. They are too young, Sasuke. Makoto is only 4 and Katsu has just learned to walk. Please. Sasuke lent Sakura a hand and pulled her up into his arms. You were always too naive, Sakura. She felt the familiar feeling of a hand pushing into the pressure point on her neck, and Sakura knew she had made a terrible mistake. Danzo asked me for permission for taking them into his care, and I agreed. And then everything went black for her. Later she woke up in prison, where she had spent the last few weeks. Then flashback. Sakura ended her tale and told them she suspected her children were held in the root training facility. She told them she was going to try and save them no matter what. Naruto noted that his former teammate would most likely never even make it past the guards at the entry, and he took Hinata to the side. I have to help her, Hinata. I know. Considering who Naruto was, Hinata knew what he was going to do. And she would never try to force him to abandon his ideals. I'll come with you. I think you should go home with your sister and get her to a hospital, Hinata. She still hasn't regained consciousness. I won't leave you here in danger while I get to safety on my own. Hanabi will be fine once we teleport her to the west. I'll stay. Naruto nodded. He had figured things would turn out this way. The two of them went back to Sakura, who was trying to get to her feet. Sakura, we'll send you and Hanabi back to safety. Hinata and I will infiltrate the root base and get your children back. That's a promise. No. Sakura got on her knees. Please, I have to make sure they are safe. I won't get in the way. I can fight. Naruto and Hinata looked at each other. They knew taking Sakura with them was a risk, but they could relate to the young mother. Hinata created a shadow clone who took the sleeping Hanabi from her hands. Naruto, teleport my sister to safety and send your paths with me. We'll clear out the entrance and wait for you two there. Naruto agreed immediately. He created several shadow clones of his own. Some of them immediately gathered at the teleportation circle and quickly teleported Hinata's clone together with Hanabi away, while Naruto recreated his paths from the remaining ones. Hinata and the paths immediately rushed away into the direction of the root base. Sakura stared after them in disbelief. Then Naruto picked up Sakura and put her on his back to carry her piggyback. Why would she do that? Huh? Why did Hinata agree to help me? And why did she leave us alone like this? I think she knew she couldn't stop me from helping you, Sakura. She often knows what I'm about to do before I know it myself. And why wouldn't she leave us alone? We were teammates and friends and didn't talk for a long time. But Sakura was a bit uncomfortable asking this, but she decided to just say it anyway. Naruto, we both know that you used to have a crush on me. And? The pink medic was a bit taken aback by that question. Naruto was as dense as ever. Naruto, I wouldn't have left Sasuke alone with Ino if she had still been in the leaf and she was my best friend. You mean Hinata should have been afraid that the both of us would? Yes. But I am married to Hinata. Sakura stared at him blankly before stating. That doesn't exactly stop many people from cheating on their partners, Naruto. Well, I promised I would be faithful to my wife and I always keep my word. Despite everything that had happened, Sakura laughed at that. Naruto was still Naruto and things certainly seemed to brighten up with him around. Naruto looked a bit irritated, he thought she was making fun of him. But it was the exact opposite. Sakura had to admit that she was actually jealous of the relationship Naruto and Hinata shared, the blind trust and understanding they had for each other. She wondered what could have been if she hadn't lost Sasuke to Danzo. I am sorry for laughing, Naruto. It is good to know you are still the same knucklehead you were back then. She sighed. You know, when Sasuke hid from me that you had become emperor, he did it because he was jealous. Really? Yes, you being so much more successful irked him to no end. He was furious after I found out. Naruto grinned. He couldn't help still being competitive with his former teammate. The two masked guards in front of the root complex didn't stand a chance. Hinata sneaked up behind the female one and killed her with a Juken strike to the neck, while Naruto's paths riddled the other guard with kunai from various directions. A few minutes later Naruto arrived with Sakura on his back. His paths meanwhile were trying to pry the gate open and failed miserably. The door was inlaid with many seals that continued on the parts of the building that were overground. Sakura, stop. Sakura had gotten off from Naruto's back and was determined to get to her children as fast as possible and help the royal couple as best as she could despite her condition. She ignored Naruto's call, gathered her chakra, and punched the doors with all the strength she could. Naruto and Hinata winced, and the young emperor's healing path immediately attempted to get their fallen friend back to her feet. Hinata addressed her husband. How long would it take you to dismantle the seal, Naruto? I guess about an hour. And we don't have that much time. What? Sakura groggily got up from the ground and made her way over to them, with the healing path scurrying after her. There must be another way. Please. Sakura-san, please calm down. I promise we will rescue your children. Sakura stared at Hinata hopefully, and Naruto nodded. There is always more than one way to disable a seal. And since we can't afford to use time and my skill as a seal master to do it, we will just use brute force. We won't have much chakra left, Naruto. The blonde nodded and put his hand on the doors. Then Hinata carefully put her own hand on top of his. Sakura watched the two of them as she suddenly felt them both flaring their chakra to incredible levels. The seal on the door flashed shortly and then there was loud crack before the seal suddenly grew dim and the doors slowly swung open. Let's go. Leave him alone. In a dark lab deep under the earth, Mikoto Haruno was strapped to a wall while a lean, pale man leaned over her little brother. Fukuku. I am afraid I cannot do that. I am supposed not to damage you, to not hinder your training. But he isn't ready for that yet. Hatsu just stared at the man above him in fright. Little children would have been crying under circumstances like this normally, but the dark-haired man's aura prevented him from doing even that. What are you going to do with this one, Orochimaru-sama? Another man with silver hair and glasses had silently entered the chamber and approached the little table Katsu was lying on. Akabuto. I was about to take a closer look at the boy's eyes. Trying to take their secrets from them. It is a shame that they usually take so many years to develop their powers. Maybe we can find a way to speed that process up. He casually grabbed for a scalpel lying on a table next to him and leaned closer to Katsu. No, please leave him alone. Mikoto was crying openly at this point while Katsu was just shivering. Fukuku, such devotion. But unfortunately I have no other choice to advance my research. Maybe if you unlock the Sharingan we wouldn't need to do this. Orochimaru was actively trying to put the two children under stress, especially Mikoto. She was the one who maybe had a chance to unlock her Sharingan already. From the records of the Uchiha family he knew that it was probably still far too early, but he didn't really care about his prisoner's mental health. And so this little experiment was a good way to prove this theory. Ignoring the girl's screams and pleas, Orochimaru leaned over Katsu again and brought his scalpel close to the small boy's eyes. Only to be catapulted away from the table and into a wall. When the Sannin had gotten out of the rubble, he was immediately engaged by several blonde-haired shinobi. He used a quick-fire jutsu to annihilate his attackers and saw Kabuto being attacked by the same kind of enemies in another part of the laboratory. Orochimaru slowly made his way back to the other side of the room, where he briefly inspected the now empty shackles that previously held Mikoto and the table where her brother had lain before the attack. My apologies, Orochimaru-sama. I was unable to prevent them from taking the children. Kabuto had gotten rid of his attackers and joined Orochimaru. I think this development is very interesting, Kabuto. Let us see what comes of it. Sasuke Uchiha was a very conflicted man. On the one hand he was excited. His old rival Naruto was in arm's reach. Danzo's men had hunted the small group of ninja and escaped children through the underground complex for half an hour now. They engaged only lightly, wearing Naruto, Hinata and Sakura down, and withdrew when it got too dangerous. But at the same time they used every bit of explosives and forbidden jutsu available to them to keep the group away from the exit. In addition to that, Konoha shinobi had found a large sealing circle a few kilometers outside of Konoha. If their information was right, they had successfully cut Naruto's group off from their escape route by that. Sasuke knew he was very close to have the blonde menace, who had shamed him, groveling at his feet. But on the other hand the Uchiha was irritated. Back when he had broken up with Sakura, he had been far more affected than he had shown in public. He had buried himself in work and taken every mission he could get his hands on. After 1 week Danzo had to temporarily take him off the rooster since Sasuke couldn't sleep at night. It took 1 month until he was finally allowed to take missions again, and his desire for revenge had drowned out his thoughts about his former wife. He had accepted Karen as his new partner on Danzo's wish, but he didn't care about the girl at all. And then 1 month ago his mentor had asked him for permission to take charge of his children. Sasuke had actually refused at first, but Orochimaru had promised him forbidden jutsu, and Sasuke took the offer without thinking. Once again he had spent a sleepless night and had considered going to Orochimaru when Sakura came to him. He was genuinely impressed that she had managed to get away from Danzo himself and was close to promising her that he would call the whole thing off. But then Sakura had gotten on her knees and begged him and reminded him of the one thing he hated about her. Her weakness. To him it made her unreliable as a partner, and it was a grim reminder of his own helplessness in front of Itachi. And he completely failed to see that he was the only person whom she would willingly show her weakness as a sign of trust. That was why he had betrayed her. And now Naruto's and Hinata's rescue mission had once again reopened old wounds. He heard footsteps and he knew that the other groups had succeeded in driving the royal couple and their protégés towards him. He gave a sign towards the 10 root agents, including one white-haired Sannin. The trap was set. 6 Narutos came running into the room in a circle formation, Rinnegan active, and in their middle were Hinata, Sakura and his children. The group stopped in front of the root agents, eyeing them tiredly. This is as far as you go, Naruto. Sasuke took a few steps forward while activating his Sharingan. His men had repeatedly reported that the group had been conserving chakra and he was certain that they were running low. Drop your weapons and surrender. In your dreams, Sasuke. The Narutos took a defensive stance, getting ready for battle. You don't want to do this, Naruto. Sakura's children might get hurt. I don't think you have the guts to fight under these circumstances. What the heck? You would attack your own children. It was Mitoko that had shouted and the whole group suddenly glared at her. Sasuke's eyes grew wide and he performed a few quick hand signs. Phoenix Flower Jutsu. The ensuing inferno left nothing of the group. Ureya. Find out where they are. The old Sannin nodded and relayed orders to his men. 5 minutes later he approached Sasuke with news from his subordinates. There are 3 new groups. He pulled out a map of the underground complex. Here, here and here. We haven't been able to identify the real ones yet. Sasuke shook his head. I know, Naruto. They will all be fake. He studied the map and he noticed a big room close to the middle of the locations of all 3 groups. He cursed and then started running while shouting orders. Have all men attack that room at once. We have to stop them. 5 minutes later he arrived at the large iron doors. The floor was littered with dead root agents and a few Naruto clones, a Hinata clone and a path with Rinnegan eyes were still defending the location. They didn't stand a chance against the newcomers with their current chakra and were destroyed in a heartbeat. Sasuke pushed the iron doors open, only to see Naruto, Hinata, Sakura and his children standing in a large round ceiling circle before they vanished into thin air right before his eyes. The Sharingan user would later destroy the training ground in the Uchiha compound out of frustration, including a small dojo. Strangely enough, despite all the damage and death caused by Naruto and Hinata, the destroyed village wall and the abduction of the heirs of the Uchiha clan, the biggest blow done to Konoha was done by a single shadow clone. Even though this became apparent only much later. That one clone of Naruto had explored the underground complex alone, looking for an escape route for his boss, and stumbled upon a luxurious door strengthened by seals. It took him 10 minutes to undo the seal on the door and another 20 minutes to unlock the safe hidden in a small corner of the room. And he managed to deliver his haul back to Naruto just in time, before Root's arrival. The safe had contained 3 small notebooks, bound in black leather. "Mommy?" Sakura groaned, still mostly asleep. She still felt extremely exhausted and the bed she was lying on was very comfortable. "Mommy?" In a jolt Sakura was awake. She jerked upwards, her hand instinctively reaching for a kunai usually hidden underneath her pillow. There wasn't any. When she got her bearings, she realized that there was no kind of danger. She was lying in a hospital bed. Next to her sat old friend Ino in a chair, smiling at her, and next to the bed stood her children, Mikoto holding her young brother's hand. In the doorframe stood 2 children she hadn't seen before. A girl with wild black hair, smiling at her, and a blonde-haired kid with Byakugan eyes. While the girl stood proudly in the middle of the door, the boy peered shyly into the room, hiding most of his body behind the doorframe. Sakura figured that this had to be Naruto's and Hinata's children. "Mommy, can we play ninja with Hitomi-chan and Minato-kun, please?" Sakura was a bit confused. When they had arrived in a teleportation circle in the Empire yesterday, her children had been nervous wrecks. Sakura herself had been completely exhausted, but she remembered clearly the 2 small bodies shivering and sobbing against her chest until she passed out. She decided to ignore that fact for now. Instead, she put her arms around her children and pulled them close. Having them close to her and in safety was incredibly reassuring after everything that had happened. "Mommy, can we please?" Reluctantly, the pink-haired ninja let go of her children. "Of course, but make sure you are careful with Katsu." "Sure, Mom." Mikoto grabbed her little brother's hand tighter and led him out of the room, following the Uzumaki children. Ino spoke up. "Sorry for waking you, I wanted to make sure you saw them before they went out." Sakura nodded and stared into the direction her children had vanished. "Thank you, Ino. How can they be so carefree after all that happened?" Her blonde friend's expression became sorrowful. "We had to erase their memories. I am sorry I did this without your consent, but it had to be done." "Just what did they do to them?" Ino shook her head. "I am sorry, Sakura, but it is better you do not know. I cannot have you look for their tormentors for revenge. They need their mother." Sakura nodded. She felt safe for the first time in a while, and now she felt exhaustion catching up with her. Ino noticed. "Get a bit more rest, Sakura. You still look very tired. I promise I'll look after your little ones in the meantime." "Thank you, Ino." Sleep was overwhelming her quickly, but before succumbing to the soft mattress she still managed to mumble. "Thank you all so much." Flashback. The day before. Konohamaru Sarutobi had dealt with the aftereffects of the attack on the wall for hours. He had organized medical treatment for both civilians and shinobi, overseen that damaged buildings were either supported or taken down, and ordered the search for corpses in the collapsed houses. He was tired. But when he finally heard about the attack on the root headquarters, he was there within 10 minutes. When he arrived, the entrance bustled with activity. Root ninja were entering or leaving the facility, bringing investigation gear and carrying away bodies. Konohamaru ignored them and made his way to the 2 body bags lying close to the entrance. Like in a trance, he kneeled in front of the bag containing the female figure and slowly opened the zipper. Usually death didn't faze him, but this was different. With shaking hands he grabbed for the ski mask covering the girl's hair and lifted it just a little bit to see bright orange locks spill out. With a sharp yank, Konohamaru closed the bag, slowly got up and walked away, staggering from time to time. He didn't even need to check the identity of the other person, as he knew the guard's schedule by heart. It was very late when he finally arrived at home. The young Anbu didn't even have any recollection of the way he had just taken. Once through the door, Konohamaru ran for the bathroom, towards the toilet, and threw up. He remained there, his head lying on the edge of the bowl, crying for the first time in years, as a certain revelation slowly sank into his head. Mogi and Yuden were dead. Then flashback. In the land of iron, neutral territory, a simple conference room filled with the most important people of the elemental nations and beyond. The Tsuchikage Inoki, the Raikage, the Mizukage Mei Terumi, the Kazekage Gaara, and the Emperor and Empress of the Western Empire, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze and Hinata Uzumaki Namikaze, all sat next to another in a half circle. Within the half-circle sat Mifune on his own desk, facing his guests. He was the leader of the samurai of the Land of Iron and host for this gathering. I demand an explanation, Emperor. Bei's fist caused a dent in the desk before him. What is so important that the date of this meeting had to be advanced? I don't like to waste my time. Naruto glared at the Hokage due to how derogatory he had spoken his title, but he remained silent. Instead Hinata stood up. Lords and Lady Kages, Lord Mifune. My husband and I are very sorry for this inconvenience. Originally we called for this meeting to seek your approval for an invasion of the Leaf Village. But there has been a new development that affects almost all of the elemental nations. Please take a look at this. Naruto and Hinata handed stacks of paper around the table, and a servant brought a copy to Mifune as well. These are copies of documents we recovered from Konoha. She held a small black leather notebook into the air, one of the original ones. They contain information about secret operations of the Leaf in other nations. And more importantly they contain proof that the Leaf has been collaborating with the missing nin Orochimaru and attempting to destabilize our nations by using ninja with a so-called cursed seal of heaven. On a small road in Fire Country a single man shuffled along, trying to reach the next town. He was constantly hunched over and used a walking stick to keep himself somewhat upright. These details made him appear very old, but his face was hidden under a black hood. He continued to move forward like this for a while, and then he stopped abruptly, standing completely still. Show yourself. The voice of the man didn't sound old at all. But right after saying those words he got a coughing fit and spit out blood. Out of the underbrush came Naruto, approaching the man carefully. Itachi uchiha. The man nodded and revealed his face. Sharingan eyes looked towards Naruto, seeming as intimidating as ever. But the rest of Itachi's face looked extremely sickly, and Naruto noticed that Itachi only looked into his general direction, not focusing on him. As if he was completely blind. Naruto Uzumaki. Now Uzumaki no Mikaze. Former teammate of my brother. What do I owe the pleasure? I have come to talk. I recently paid Konoha a visit and came upon some interesting information. Such as. Danzo ordered you to kill your clan. Itachi remained silent while Naruto got worked up. Do you even know what you have done to Sasuke? To him nothing matters but taking his revenge on you, not even his own wife and children. He has become a monster. Itachi looked down in shame. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wanted Sasuke to kill me, to atone for my sins and end his quest for revenge, while making sure that he was strong enough. But I miscalculated. You were damn right about that. Danzo didn't trust me to remain silent and prevented me from meeting Sasuke. He is now trying to kill me, to shut me up forever. But that will not sate Sasuke's desire for revenge. I will make sure you meet your brother. You guys need to talk. Itachi shook his head. I am a walking corpse and have been so for a while. I just have to make sure Sasuke finds peace. Danzo lied to you, too, you know. Explain. I thought you were some kind of genius. Your people were discriminated and treated like dirt. They saw only two possible solutions. Take control over Konoha. Naruto saw Itachi tense visibly. Or leave. Danzo found out. He knew that once Hiruzen started negotiations, they wouldn't even attempt that would have realized that attempting that would result in a giant bloodbath for both sides. They would have left the leaf peacefully. Itachi hung his head in shame. And migrated somewhere else. But Danzo wouldn't allow anyone else but a Konoha have access to the Sharingan. Itachi remained silent. And so he hired you to kill your own clan. Sasuke has to hear the truth. The Uchiha remained silent for a while, and then he shook his head. You can't do that. Why? That doesn't make sense. He is an Uchiha. If he finds out that the village he has served for years was responsible for his clan's demise, he'll want to burn it to the ground. What? He has defended Konoha with his life for years. He wouldn't just turn around and destroy it. Itachi shook his head sadly. That is how we Uchiha are and the reason why I have to take the blame. I am an outcast and not a Konoha shinobi. Our devotion to our family and loved ones causes us to take rather drastic action. It's our curse. Then what about Sakura and his children? They are his family as well. Hell, they should be more important than your stupid clan. We tend to lose focus on anything else when out for revenge. Naruto rubbed his head in frustration. So you want me to let Sasuke kill you? But you both are victims of Danzo's lies. There has to be another way. I don't even believe that will work anymore. Once Sasuke sees my condition, he will know Danzo withheld information from him. Then what? I will put a genjutsu on Sasuke that will make sure he is loyal to Konoha after killing me. You want to brainwash him? No way. I'll never allow that. You can't just remove his free will and pretend everything is fine. Then will you promise me to save my brother from himself? Naruto remained silent for a while. I can promise that I will try, but not that it will work. I feel like I would have to be ready to give my life for that, and I can't afford to die. I have a family to protect." Itachi glared at him and a crow landed on his shoulder. "I am sorry, Naruto." The crow looked towards Naruto and he saw a spinning Sharingan. He felt himself drawn in until all he could see was a giant red eye staring down at him. It was pulling at his mind, trying to change him. A kunai thrown from the underbrush destroyed the clone, ending the jutsu. Two new Narutos approached Itachi, who had doubled over in a bloody coughing fit. One of the clones grabbed the crow and destroyed its Sharingan using another kunai, before letting it free. Itachi glared at the Narutos from the ground, who glared back. "I'll get you to nearest hospital and leave you there. And if you try anything again, I won't hesitate to put you down." Mei Terumi stared at her colleagues. How things had changed since their first meeting 2 weeks ago. Back then she and the other Kages had been prepared for the Empire to ask for permission to attack Konoha without interference from either of them. The Empire's war preparations and intentions had long since been found out by their secret agencies. They would have most likely allowed that, but at the same time they would have made the West bleed for it. And now she stared at the raised hands of Gaara and Inoki. What a turnaround. Verifying the authenticity of the documents provided by the royal couple had been easy. The papers contained every single informant and spy Danzo had, the locations of secret bases and emergency stashes. They contained standard behavior and emergency orders. Konoha would have needed months to erase all traces of their activities. Months they didn't have. The prisons of the other villages contained dozens of captured Konoha shinobi each. All of them had seals on them that prevented them from telling their village's secrets, but ironically the recovered documents contained the key for even that. It was an unprecedented uncovery of village secrets. Mei couldn't believe her eyes when she saw Mifune raise his hand. "The samurai of the Land of Iron will also participate in this alliance. Well, Konoha didn't take action against us, they clearly are a menace that has to be dealt with. We samurai won't ignore what's happening in the world any longer." An alliance. That was the reason for this vote. Not only the Empire would be marching against Konoha, but many armies together. Most of the other elemental nations had been targets for the Leaf's operations, and now they wanted revenge. The Land of Water was the only one that didn't become a target of the cursed seal-bearing shinobi. Mei had actually retained reasonably good relations with Konoha, despite them becoming more and more secluded. The Mist wasn't allied with the Leaf, but they were still closer with them than with the other villages. So Mei didn't have any reason to participate in this war. But then again the same was true for Mifune. Mei knew that participating in this war would mean the loss of many good men, and the costs in money and material would overweight any gain, especially since Naruto and Gaara had made it clear that they wouldn't tolerate pillaging. But there were other benefits, which Mifune must have considered as well when he decided to participate. The members of this alliance would shed their blood together, and there would be friendships amongst officers and soldier, while concentrating on a common goal. It was a chance to bridge the gaps of mistrust and hate between the villages. There was no guarantee the alliance would hold after the war. But if it did, these nations would pose a front of unprecedented power. Not being a part of that was a risk. Of course there was the option to side with the Leaf, but just considering its enemy's strength that seemed just incredibly foolish. Mei Terumi raised her hand. Kiri, Kumo, Iwa, Suna and the Western Empire have all assembled their armies at the border of Fire Country and are now moving towards Konoha together. The ninja finished his report and the Konoha Council was in disarray. The latest news had been devastating. Every other of the major hidden villages as well as the Empire was moving against them. The civilian part of the council was especially worried. "We have to surrender." Danzo grimaced. The stupid civilians were panicking. They had been useful once for opposing the now emigrated Konoha clans. But now they were a liability. Tsunade stood up to carry out his orders. "Silence. Konoha doesn't bow to anyone. We are the strongest of the hidden villages and will overcome this crisis." Everyone in the council chamber held their breath. "But I can't deny that it should have never come to this, and as Hokage I have to bear responsibility. I will step down and hereby name Danzo Shimura to be my successor and the 6th Hokage." "This is madness, Tsunade-sama. This alliance specifically wants the man's head. If their accusations are true, Danzo has sabotaged and sown unrest in almost all of our enemies' countries. We should hand him over." Tsunade slammed a hand on her desk, scaring the civilians. "They are trying to weaken us, but we will not fall for this ploy. Danzo Shimura has the capability to deal with this situation, and our enemies know this as well." "But..." "Silence." Tsuminyazuka stood up. She had been on bad terms with the Hokage since she was controlled by Danzo and on even worse terms with the man himself. The Inyazuka and Sarutobi were currently the strongest clans in Konoha since the Hyuga had been severely weakened after Hanabi's coup. The old Sarutobi on the council as well as Hiashi Hyuga both supported Danzo, so Tsume was the only one who had any chance of leading an opposition against the old hawk. But that was not what happened. And you fools respect your Hokage's last decision. And you civilians shouldn't even interfere in matters you know nothing about. Leave this to us shinobi. And it is as Tsunade-sama said, Konoha will definitely prevail. Most of the council stared at her in disbelief, while Danzo smirked. Tsunade spoke up again. We will start preparations for a small inauguration ceremony as well as planning Konoha's defense. We will meet again tomorrow. This council is adjourned. After most people had left the room, only Tsume, Danzo and Tsunade were left. Tsume glared at Danzo. I did what you wanted, bastard. Now release my son. I am afraid I cannot do that yet, Tsume. Attacking the Hokage's most trusted advisor, soon to be Hokage even, is a serious offense. And I think I'll hold on to Kiba until the Inuzuka have helped protect Konoha from this approaching army. You're insane. If you loved Konoha like you said you did, you would give yourself up. You will be the reason it gets burned to the ground. Danzo shook his head. I would give my life for this village any time. But Konoha needs me. The current alliance is a farce. It will never hold. Who do you think will lead it? The emotional and foolish Raikage. The old backstabber Inoki or the usurper Mei. The child emperor Kazekage. Mark my words, Tsume, once we have beaten back their first attack they will fall apart. And once everything is over I will be the one to lead the elemental nations to true peace. Tsume deeply regretted giving in to the man's demands at this moment. She was sure he had gone insane, and she could only hope her actions hadn't doomed everyone in the leaf. Danzo was making his way deep into his root base. He stopped in front of a large iron gate, which was guarded by a single one of his shinobi. The man bowed. Danzo-sama. Open the door, I have to speak to Orochimaru. No matter how convinced Danzo was that a Leaf Shinobi army led by him would be unbeatable, he still would need everything he could get his hands on to overcome these enemies. And Orochimaru was sure to have a whole bunch of deadly experimental jutsu, potions and poisons at his disposal. Lord Orochimaru asked not to be disturbed. Ignore that order. I have to speak to him now. The shinobi nodded and opened the gate. But the room behind it was completely empty, except for a large round hole in the opposite wall. Orochimaru was gone. 2 weeks ago 6 armies had met in rock territory. But instead of engaging in a large battle, all of them had joined together to march against a common target. Konoha. The Alliance army was in fact not as large as some people might have thought. It was only made up of 40,000 shinobi and samurai. But there was a reason for that. The allied villages and nations had decided to rely mostly on their more experienced fighters and leave all genin and less able chunin out of the fighting. That resulted in an army with an incredibly high portion of jonin. An elite army like it had never seen before. Danzo had been right about one thing. The leadership of the alliance had been a problem. Naruto, Hinata and Gaara were all considered still too young with their 22 years of age. Inoki was too old. That left the Raikage, the Mizukage Mei and Mifune, general of the samurai forces of the Land of Iron. Mifune had no experience in leading shinobi and coordinating their jutsu, so he was not an option. Mei and her village had not been directly affected by Konoha's actions, and Inoki and A considered her not completely trustworthy. And finally the Raikage had a reputation of being very emotional and aggressive. After long discussions they settled for a joint leadership between A and Mei, with the Raikage being first in command. There had been many problems when the armies of the various countries first joined together in rock territory, right next to the border to the Land of Fire. The mistrust and hate that had grown for centuries between the various factions hadn't dissipated. The shinobi from the mist had been kept an eye on especially since they had not been attacked by Konoha. Many feared they would betray the alliance. While the other leaders planned the attack on Konoha itself, Naruto had taken upon him the task of organizing scouting parties and sent out raiding parties to destroy known Konoha outposts. The whole thing had been a great success. With the help of Hinata, Shikamaru and Ino, for psychological evaluations, he formed mixed teams from the various factions. The fact that everyone gave their best to represent their village or country well, led to the teams quickly learning to respect and rely on each other. The simple tactic helped get rid of a lot of the mistrust between each other. After how well that it went, Naruto, Hinata and Shikamaru planned and enacted a larger scale mission in the same manner. Thanks to Naruto's teleportation seals the Alliance army had no problems getting supplies even deep in enemy territory. But Konoha's knowledge about the jutsu's capabilities were still limited and so they organized a decoy supply caravan. Thanks to the main army moving relatively slowly due to having to scout ahead to avoid ambushes, minding the slowest ninja and samurai and not overexerting the troops, a small force of well-trained shinobi could leave and rejoin the main force without a problem. Konoha shinobi tasked with delaying the alliance took the bait and attempted to attack the fake caravan. Thanks to Hinata and other well-trained sensors, like C from Kumo, the Konoha groups were spotted well before they noticed the Alliance ambush. The ensuing pursuit ended with 16 Leaf Shinobi, or 4 combat groups, being captured. A 5th group barely managed to escape. Nevertheless, the success of the mission was celebrated upon the return to the Alliance army. At the end of it all, the relations between the nation's shinobi had improved a lot, and the other Alliance leaders acknowledged Naruto's great success in this matter. But now that was in the past. Overnight, the Alliance army had made camp just a short distance away from Konoha. Now the whole army was combat ready and in formation, just inside of the Hidden Leaf village. Everything was ready. Temari had already leveled a large amount of forest in front of the village with her wind jutsu to create a suitable battlefield. The Alliance forces were well supplied and armed for the attack. Morale couldn't be higher, and everyone was itching to exact revenge on Danzo and his men for sowing unrest in their respective homelands. And Konoha's wall had already been badly damaged by Naruto and Hinata on the side they would be attacking from. It was just a short time until their attack, and everything pointed towards a great victory for the Alliance. Naruto was proud about what they had accomplished so far, and everything would have been great if not for Hinata not being around. At the same time, 2 kunoichi dropped down from Konoha's southern wall into the village. One had short blonde hair and striking blue eyes. The other's hair was long and black, her eyes green in color. Both were wearing standard Chunin uniforms and Konoha headbands. One of them had long black hair and blue eyes, while the other one had short, ash blonde hair and green eyes. They were on a secret mission planned by the Alliance. The document stolen from Danzo's root base showed that the seals protecting Konoha and were extremely well built. They would detect any intruders without fail under normal circumstances, but there was a tiny weakness. The chakra disruption grenades recovered from a Konoha assassination mission in the Empire several years ago could potentially disable a seal layer for a few seconds. With 8 of those hard-to-produce assets in their possession, it had allowed for this 2-man team to get through without being noticed. The reliance on the seals and the fact that there would be a giant army on the other side of the village had been sure to leave the security on this side of Konoha in the hands of very few hardly threatening shinobi. The 2 kunoichi had in fact evaded 2 groups of genin fresh from the academy who were tasked with checking the various seal layers. The young genin didn't even have a clue about the veteran shinobi's presence. The mission to infiltrate Konoha was of course extremely dangerous, but at the same time it offered a chance to further weaken Konoha and reduce the Alliance's own losses. And with Konoha's defenses being very well known to the Alliance, the risks became easy to calculate. On planning the mission, all leaders forming the Alliance had come to the agreement that they didn't want to send out a suicide squad. Instead, they had been looking for the best stealth and assassination experts capable of making it out of the assignment alive. To avoid political agendas, each nation had entered the files of their best-suited shinobi for selection among the leaders without revealing their identities. These files only contained the shinobi's mission ranks, specialties, capabilities and chakra levels, without giving away their names, age or recognizable missions or jutsu. Of course, after singling out a file, these things were also taken into consideration. The first member of the 2-man squad was found easily. With hundreds of missions in just a few years, multiple assassinations and infiltrations, the hard-working dragon, or Tenten rather, Anbu captain of the Western Empire was an obvious choice. Naruto and Hinata were proud and happy for the young woman, and they knew she was dying to further prove herself. The second candidate was a different matter entirely. The village leaders went through dozens of files without finding someone they deemed capable enough. Where Tenten had brought in a very convincing Hokage of stealth and assassination experience as well as combat proofs, the other candidates all lacked in one aspect or another. Finally, Inoki directed their attention on a very peculiar file. The person in question was described as being well trained in stealth and assassination, as well as being a censor of sorts. Details were omitted to not give away the person's identity. But the most impressive thing was the person's combat evaluation. He or she was noted having above Kage level chakra reserves and being a close combat specialist, as well as possessing several close to middle range jutsu. The mission record, however, was a problem. The shinobi had hardly performed any missions in the last few years, which would normally have resulted into them immediately dismissing that candidate. But the missions that were listed were intriguing. There was one SS-ranked infiltration mission just a short while ago, and one SS-ranked combat mission 3 years ago. 5 years ago, the shinobi had still regularly performed missions, ranking from B to S. After going through the rest of the candidates and finding nobody as suitable, they somewhat agreed on that candidate to Naruto's dismay, and then the candidate was revealed as Hinata herself. Naruto hadn't been too happy when Hinata decided to become a candidate for the mission. But he had known that she was well suited and absolutely capable to make it out alive. The difference between this mission and the Hanabi rescue mission was that this time they were perfectly prepared. Konoha's defenses were well mapped out and a giant army right in front of Konoha would act as a suitable distraction. And even though infiltrating Konoha was still very dangerous, the overall consensus among the leaders was that the risks were reasonably well calculated. Naruto knew that he could have convinced Tsunade to abandon this mission regardless, but instead he supported her and only asked her for the promise to make it back safely, which she gladly delivered. But that the Empire had managed to secure a potentially very rewarding mission in regards to its reputation for handling high-priority ninja missions, all for themselves. Flashback. There were two things Hinata disliked about her planned mission. The first thing was of course leaving behind her and Naruto's children. But there was no way she would have missed the invasion of Konoha. The Leaf was her home village as well, and just like her sister and Niji, she still had a score to settle with her father and the Hyuga elders. And bringing the 5-year-olds to the battlefield was out of the question. So the parents made sure that their children were in good hands. The Ichirikas would be taking care of them, as well as a path Naruto planned to leave active in the Empire at all times. The second thing she disliked was having to change her hair. She liked her long flowing strands, especially since Naruto absolutely loved it. But she was a kunoichi after all. Petty looks were secondary to making it home safely. When she had put on her disguise she waited for Naruto in their tent, who had been sending out a couple of scouting parties. She had discussed her disguise with Tenten only, and Naruto didn't have any idea what they had come up with. So she wasn't exactly surprised when Naruto entered their tent and stared at her in confusion. "Who are you?" Hinata put her hands to her hips in mock anger. "I am really disappointed in you, Naruto. I cannot believe that you failed to even recognize your own wife." Naruto stared at her. Hinata but. I mean even though I am suppressing my chakra, you should be able to recognize me by my face. Your eyes. Contact lenses. Naruto nodded. A transformation jutsu could easily be sensed by most ninja. So using disguises did have its benefits. Your hair. I colored it blonde. Do you like it? Naruto came closer and inspected it closely. Her hair was blonde now and only reached to her neck. It is alright, but I like your natural color better. How are you hiding your long hair? She shrugged. I had to cut it. Naruto's eyes grew wide as he knew it would take long for Hinata to grow her hair back to its old length. Ooh. Then flashback. Hinata chuckled at the memory. She felt sorry for teasing Naruto like that, but the opportunity had been far too good. Maybe her husband was rubbing off on her more than she cared to admit. She promised herself that she would make it up to him, both for her teasing, as well as for going on this mission in the first place. Suddenly she felt a spike of chakra from herself, and she barely managed to suppress it, not to draw anyone's attention on herself. There was only one possible culprit. Kurama-san, please keep your chakra suppressed. Sorry Vixen. Seems I got a bit excited. But it has been far too long after all. Oh no, what are you talking about? It has been far too long since since we have hunted last. I am not hunting, Kurama-san. I am not going after animals. Hinata didn't like the term hunting for humans. While animals could feel pain and basic emotions just like humans, there was still a vast difference. She was about to end the hopes and dreams of many people, tear apart families and lovers, and she had come to terms with that prospect. But she wasn't going to belittle the significance of taking those lives by treating them like animals. The fox just snickered. Are you not? Don't you slowly sneak up on your prey until you are so close you can hear its breath. Don't you hold your breath in excitement and wonder whether you have been discovered. Don't you jump out of hiding and take down your prey. You are hunting, Vixen. Hinata could image the vicious grin in the fox's face at that moment. She decided to ignore him and focus on the mission instead. She was getting closer to the western side of the wall, the one she and Naruto had mostly destroyed. All the holes were still there, barely patched up about a meter high. But this being the case the wall hardly offered any advantage at all, and so the village leaders had abandoned the idea of using it to their advantage. Hinata could already see Konoha's army just outside of it, getting ready to greet the Alliance army once it attacked. At the outer edge a bright glowing barrier jutsu protected the Konoha army from long-range attacks. From time to time it would light up when a jutsu thrown at it by the Alliance hit it, only testing the barrier's strength. She knew that Naruto had erected a very similar barrier on the Alliance's side. The Empress had lost Tenten out of sight, but she was sure that the Anbu captain was ahead of her. So she sped up a bit. Hinata finally reached the checkpoint at the gate leading outside to the army. Only few shinobi were still on this side of the wall. She simply strode past the guards at the checkpoint, acting like she had permission from the Hokage himself to be there. And then she stood right among the Konoha ranks. She carefully moved on, while eyeing her surroundings. To her right in the very center was a large circle of Jonin and Root shinobi, protecting the new Hokage Danzo and his most important soldiers. Of course killing Danzo had been brought up as a potential mission objective, but just as predicted the man was far too concerned with his own safety to be a reasonable target. As she moved forward through the ranks, Hinata noticed that Konoha's army was much larger than it had any right to be. It was almost as large as the Alliance army in fact. But as she continued observing she realized why that was the case. She saw old and wrinkled men and women in worn-out uniforms, retired shinobi who had the luck of surviving their active career. And she saw children. Genin fresh from the academy stood behind their jonin senseis. Some seemed terrified by the prospect of participating in the battle, some eager to fight and prove themselves. Hinata felt bad for the eager ones. They would charge headlong to their deaths. Danzo was gambling the Leafs' very future on the ridiculous small chance of winning this battle. There was one more group of people that had no right of being among a shinobi army. A couple of thousand of them actually as far as Hinata could see. Men and women in brand new Chunin armor, wearing crude weapons like cheap swords or clubs, watched closely by real Konoha shinobi. Hinata guessed that those were common bandits or armed civilians. Danzo must have recruited them to make his army appear more threatening, but in reality they would hardly add any fighting power against well-trained shinobi and samurai. Hinata simply continued to stride forward through the ranks of the Konoha army, not showing any nervousness. Finally she reached the front line and approached the jonin in charge of the battalion there. "Sir? I have some last orders from the Hokage for you." The man nodded and she pulled out a simple envelope covering the place where there was only a basic copy of the Konoha sigil and got to arm's length up to him. Suddenly there was a loud explosion and the sound of fighting from the right flank. The large barrier got weaker and Hinata knew that Tenten had started. A single Juiken strike to the distracted man's heart ended the jonin's life. Hinata brushed past him and moved forward, nobody yet noticing what she had done with Tenten acting a distraction. The only people in front of the first line of soldiers were the men and women of the sealing squad responsible for the barrier. Hinata's and Tenten's targets. Hinata drew out several kunai and before anyone realized what was happening, she had killed 6 members of the squad with precise hits to their necks, the throwing weapons flying faster than a normal eye could follow. Then she surrounded herself in demonic chakra and charged towards the sealing squad members at the left flank. At the same time Tenten had finished on the right flank, but there had been 2 targets in the center she hadn't managed to reach and she was out of time. Konoha shinobi swarmed her from all sides. She went through several hand signs at incredible high speeds and slammed her hand into the ground. Exploding rock sphere. It was a self-defense jutsu she had come up with herself, using her secondary element earth. A shock wave went through the earth, knocking over everyone in its wake. At the same time sharp rock pieces flew in every direction, killing several shinobi. Tenten had only gained a very small of time, but it was more than one enough. She took out a piece of paper from her uniform with seal designs on it. It was not active, but it only needed a bit of chakra to turn it from a simple piece of chakra into an active Horatian seal. In a blink Naruto was at her side, who grabbed her and then they were gone, leaving behind many confused Konoha shinobi. Hinata had finished on the left flank, but with her Byaku gone, she saw the last remaining 2 sealing squad members standing in the center position of the Leafs' front line, barely managing to sustain the large barrier jutsu. They were surrounded by many Konoha shinobi guarding them. They were probably not enough to keep up the barrier for much longer, but Hinata wanted a clean sweep. She entered her mindscape. "Let's go all out, Kurama-san." The fox grinned viciously as the young woman completely opened the seal on her belly, enabling him to bring out all of his chakra. In the real world Hinata was suddenly lifted in the air, surrounded by more and more bright glowing demonic chakra, which soon formed into the shape of the Kyuubi itself. Konoha shinobi screamed in fright and scrambled away from the massive beast. It pounced right on the group of jonin with the sealing squad members and tore them all to shreds in seconds. But Hinata knew that she wasn't invincible, especially with Uraya, Tsunade, Kakashi and Guy around. While Kyuubi continued to tear through Konoha shinobi she produced a piece of paper just like Tenten's and a second later Naruto had already gotten her to safety into the ranks of the Alliance army. The Kyuubi construct dispersed and the Konoha army watched helplessly as the protective barrier in front of them vanished into nothing. Then long-range jutsu thrown by the Alliance started tearing into them. As exploding pieces of rock, fireballs and wind jutsu started decimating his shinobi Danzo knew that he only had 2 options. Either he ordered the retreat into Konoha and risked a long-term battle that would most likely leave the whole village in ruins. But even if they managed to slowly grind down the enemy within the walls of Konoha, without a functioning village Konoha would perish in the long run. Or he ordered his men to attack into the waiting Alliance army. That was definitely not what he had wanted to do. The Alliance was supposed to attack into them, to fight on their terms. But thanks to the Alliance blocking all long-range attacks with solid-looking barrier, Jutsu Konoha was forced to act. People of Konoha. Don't waver. We are the strongest village and will overcome every enemy. Attack. The Konoha shinobi were demoralized from the death of the Sealing Squad and the appearance of the QB. Most of them knew that the chances beating an army sent by the other major villages as well as Iron Country and the Western Empire were almost non-existent. But Konoha's ninja were very well trained and loyal to their Hokage, no matter who it was. The Konoha army charged. Both lethal as well as non-lethal jutsu hit the formation time and time again, cutting deep holes into their ranks. And finally the Konoha army reached the Alliance army and the battle began as the two front lines met. The Leaf shinobi were hard-pressed right from the first minute. In average the Alliance ninja were just better. All of the allied factions had people in their ranks that could take on even the best Konoha jonin. And then there were the Kage-level shinobi. Gaara controlled torrents of sand to capture dozens of Konoha shinobi at the same time. A's adoptive brother B, Jinchuriki of the Eight Tails, used his giant tentacles, and Tsuchikage Inoki used rock jutsu to submerge whole regiments, not even bringing out his legendary particle style. And the alliance leaders A and Mei hadn't even joined the battle yet. On the right flank the younger Ino Shikacho formation was responsible for taking down over 200 enemies. Shikamaru grabbed groups of enemies using his shadows and choked them until they were unconscious. Choji acted as a meat shield and protected both Shikamaru and Ino using his close combat prowess. But the one who was the most terrifying was Ino. Large groups of enemies storming at them simply collapsed as if they were marionettes whose strings had been cut. She especially focused on the genin and saved the lives of many children by taking them out of the battle. Sakura knew she was supposed to stay back with the medic squad, but there was something she had to do. Soon enough she found her target. Sasuke. The Uchiha pushed a dead samurai from the tip of his sword and turned towards her. "What are you doing here, Sakura?" "I am here to take you prisoner, Sasuke. No matter what happened between us, I can't let you die here for our children's sake. And if I don't want to be captured by you, then I will take you by force." The Uchiha laughed. The next thing Sakura felt was a sword piercing her chest from behind and Sasuke leaning over her shoulder. The Sasuke in front of her vanished into thin air. "You couldn't even touch me, Sakura. You're too weak." The Pincat would have chuckled, but that would have revealed that his arrogance had driven him right into her trap. She grabbed him and threw him over her shoulder face first into the ground with all her might. The ground shook and Sasuke's head buried a bit into the ground due to her strength. Then she had to quickly save herself. She pushed the katana still lodged into her backwards. Every centimeter hurt, but she continued until it finally fell to the ground behind her. She activated the seal on her forehead and her wounds quickly healed. Unfortunately Sasuke had shakily gotten to his feet by this point. "You will regret that, Sakura." But then a bright glowing fist hit him right into the face at incredible speed. Sakura recognized Hinata, still most of her disguise, Byakugan active. Sasuke was thrown back almost 100 meters, hitting the ground multiple times painfully and finally crashing into a rock. He remained still, knocked unconscious. "Thanks, Hinata." The Empress nodded and stormed back into the thick of the battle. Sakura turned back to Sasuke and approached her former husband. Suddenly there appeared a swirling vortex right where Sasuke had been lying, and then he was gone. Sakura could only stare at the spot where he had been only seconds ago. Meanwhile Konoha's forces were slowly grinded down. With the alliance superior numbers and training more and more Leaf shinobi were killed, knocked unconscious or taken prisoners. All organization or prepared tactics of Konoha had been abandoned as the alliance had first separated large sections of the Leaf army and surrounded them. As things stood it was only a matter of time until Konoha was thoroughly defeated. "These guys are weak." Suigetsu and Jugo stood side by side on the battlefield fighting through the hordes of alliance shinobi. The water specialist managed to decapacitate a Kumo shinobi, while Jugo punched a hole into the ribsage of an Empire samurai. The two of them had been left behind by Orochimaru when he left Konoha. Danzo had given them a hard time, especially since the snake had managed to take the pregnant Karen with him. Suigetsu split another shinobi in two with his executioner blade and prepared to take on the next one when the alliance soldiers suddenly backed away. A large dark-skinned man with several swords stepped forward. He wore sunglasses and had blonde hair. Then the man suddenly started to rap sort of. "I saw your game and I have to say your skills make me go yay. But one thing you need to see, you're no match for Killer B." The man started pulling out multiple swords and balanced them on his arms and legs. Suigetsu put his executioner blade over his shoulder tauntingly. "I got this, Jugo. I'll finish this guy in a heartbeat." But unfortunately for Suigetsu things did not go his way at all. Tenten tore through a group of Leaf soldiers that seemed like it had never received any ninja training at all. It took her only a few minutes to incapacitate the 14 men and one woman who were wearing crude and cheap weapons like clubs and swords. Not a single one had to die as she used pressure points, blunt strikes to their heads, and the breaking of a few arms and legs to ensure her enemies would stay down. And now she was looking for a new enemy, someone who posed a bit of a challenge. She didn't have to wait long as close to her a group of rock shinobi was scattered in all direction by an earth-shattering explosion. At least it had seemed like one. But as the dust settled, Tenten realized that this had been caused by a single punch from a particular woman. Tenten grinned as she recognized her idol, Hokage for many years and member of the legendary Sannin Tsunade. The young Anbu captain pulled out 2 weapon scrolls and charged. Tenten threw both scrolls forward, they unrolled to both of her sides. As she continued to charge towards Tsunade, she unsealed kunai with both her hands and threw them faster than anyone else ever could. Tsunade dodged and parried most of the weapons, but some lodged into her arms and legs. But that didn't even slow the Sannin down. Tenten had almost reached Tsunade, and the blonde woman threw a punch at the approaching Anbu captain. The young woman knew that a single punch of Tsunade would most likely kill her. She dodged and Tsunade's fist missed her face only by centimeters. Using her momentum, Tenten slid on the ground, whipped out 2 more kunai and cut the tendons in the Sannin's feet before sliding past. Tsunade fell, but Tenten knew she had only 1 second. She was still close to Tsunade when she put her feet down to catapult herself from the ground right into the air. Mid-flight she pulled out another weapon scroll and unsealed a bunch of senbon needles. She threw all of them immediately at the Sannin, hoping to hit the pressure point in her neck to incapacitate her. But Tsunade rolled around and stopped the barrage by putting her left forearm in the way. Then she managed to immediately stand up to Tenten's astonishment, who got ready for another round against the powerful woman. Both women took a bit of time as they prepared themselves and carefully watched each other. Tsunade activated the seal on her forehead. Strange designs appeared on her face, and her wounds vanished in an instant. Tenten drew the Uzumaki sword given to her by Naruto. Then both charged towards each other again. This time Tsunade directed her punch to the ground, sending rock splitters everywhere and forcing Tenten to back off, even having to block some rocks with her sword. Tsunade followed, but this time Tenten was faster. Before Tsunade's hand made contact with the ground again, Tenten cut it clean off. Tsunade tried to grab the young woman with her other hand, but Tenten managed to dodge that, too, with a roll as she passed the Sannin. Tsunade quickly grabbed her missing hand and reattached it. With a hiss the wound closed and the hand was already functional again. But then the legendary Sannin fell to her knees. Do you like it? The poison on the kunai was the same as the one used by the famous Asori of the Red Sands. The poison on the senbon is my own creation. Both are slow acting, so you didn't realize immediately that you were poisoned. And finally the poison on my sword was the poison of the most poisonous toad of Naruto summons. Tsunade was on her knees and trying to get rid of the poisons. No way in hell she was going down like this. It took the legendary Sannin only 10 seconds to counteract 3 of the most dangerous poisons. But 10 seconds are an eternity in a shinobi battle. Before Tsunade could stand up, Tenten jabbed a senbon into her neck, knocking her out cold. All over the battlefield slug summons attached to Konoha shinobi, healing them, vanished. Konoha had lost one of their last trump cards. At the same time Jiraiya collapsed as well, his chakra drained by Shino, and he was being held down by Fu using her chakra cloak. Even without his toad summons, the old man still had his sage mode after a bit of preparation and his own jutsu. But without Ma and Pa his sage mode was drastically limited, a fact the summons had of course relayed to Naruto, and by that the rest of the alliance. And so Shino and Fu only had to keep him busy until his sage mode ran out, before overpowering him. Danzo had stayed close to his most trusted shinobi in the center of the Konoha army. Suddenly a 3-pronged kunai embedded itself in the ground close to them, and Naruto appeared in a blink. Danzo Shimura. I heard you are Hokage now. Well, the son of the 4th Hokage sends you his regards. Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu. 1,000 clones appeared in front of the Konoha group and Naruto vanished again. Then the swarm of clones attacked Danzo's group, surrounding them. The clones were no match for the well-trained ninja, but there were lots of them. We have a little present for you. The booming sound of all of the clones speaking at the same time was heard. Hage Bunshin Daibakuha. All of the clones made the same hand sign at the same time and then they exploded. The explosion radius was huge, carving a 50-meter wide crater into the ground, and Danzo's group had been right in the center of it. When the dust settled, everyone could see the mangled and burned corpse of Danzo lying on the ground among his men. Everybody put down your weapons. We have lost this battle. The voice of Konohamaru Sarutobi rang through the battlefield after noticing Danzo's death. Several defeated but still breathing alliance ninja were lying at his feet. He raised his hands and dropped his kunai, showing everyone he wasn't going to continue fighting. His squad did the same. He is right. This is our loss. Kakashi Hotaki, legendary copycat ninja, dropped his weapons too to save the lives of as many of his fellow shinobi as possible. Inyazuka, stand down. This battle is over. Proving that the quick surrender of a large portion of the Konoha army was no coincidence at all, Tsunade Yuzuka ordered her clan to give up as well. She was in a completely different part of the battlefield from the others, but Konohamaru and Kakashi had fired previously agreed jutsu into the air to notify their co-conspirators. Many Konoha shinobi close to them dropped their weapons as well and were taken captive by Alliance soldiers. But then another voice rang over the battlefield. "You can't be serious, Kakashi. Has your youth withered so much? The leaf can still fight." And with that a giant shock wave of power originated from Mido Guy. Lee cried out for his sensei as he felt the 7th gate being opened and he saw him concentrating on the 8th. "I am sorry my student, Kakashi old friend, but I will have to use up all my youth to protect my village." Kakashi's Sharingan sprung to live, spinning quickly, and he looked directly into his eternal rival's eyes. Mido Guy hadn't expected an attack from his best friend for once and he went down, knocked unconscious from the gain jutsu. Kakashi held his left eye in pain before putting his arms behind his head and going down to his knees to make clear that he surrendered. More and more Konoha shinobis followed Kakashi's, Konohamaru's and Tsume's examples and let themselves get captured by Alliance shinobi. No. Wait. But the cries of the man came too late. Everywhere on the battlefield Konoha soldiers were dropping their weapons. In no time only small groups of Konoha shinobi were still offering resistance. The battle was basically over. On the battlefield stood Danzo as if nothing had happened to him, but he looked completely helpless as he knew that Konoha had lost. A ring of Alliance shinobi closed around him. The Ashi Hyuga. The Ashi, surrounded by his fellow main branch ninja, watched as Hanabi Hyuga, his daughter, walked towards them from the group of Alliance ninja surrounding them. He could see Niji behind her as well, and just as with Hinata, he had to wonder how the branch family member had survived. After his disappearance during the chaos of the small revolt on the day of Hanabi's inauguration had been discovered, his caged bird seal had been activated. "You have shamed the name of the Hyuga clan. You have revolted against your clan head and killed many of your fellow clansmen. I should throw you into Inyazuka kennels and watch you get pulled apart by their dogs' teeth. But I am not without mercy. I offer you a duel to the death to keep at least a fraction of your pathetic honor intact. What do you say?" Hanabi shortly looked to her left and Hiashi followed her look. There stood Hinata, looking back at her sister determinedly and she nodded her head once. Then she looked right back at Hiashi with an ice-cold gaze. Hiashi looked back towards his other daughter, who kept moving towards him. He shortly nodded towards his remaining allies and then advanced towards his daughter himself. "I am the true head of this clan, Hanabi. You do not stand a chance." Hanabi got into her fighting stance and Hiashi got into his own. "You are nothing but a dirty traitor who tarnishes the honor of my clan, Hiashi." The young ex-Anbu charged. She and her father exchanged quick Juuken strikes, both of them keeping their stoic composure. But the girl was just a bit faster than her faster and Hiashi soon got pushed back. The man barely managed to keep up well enough to block strikes aimed at his Tenketsu to keep his ability to use chakra. When Hanabi once again almost overcame his defense, he used his emergency option and started spinning and expelling chakra. Hayton. Hanabi jumped away from the spinning sphere of chakra and patiently waited until her father stopped his technique. He immediately got into it to her very familiar pose. "You are in the range of my divination, daughter. 8 trigrams 64 palms." But the girl was ready to counter her father's jutsu. 8 trigrams 128 palms. Hanabi's announcement worried Hiashi. There had been rumors that Hanabi had learned the technique, but she had never shown it among her clan. Even though the jutsu scroll was available to all clan members, nobody had been able to perform for at least 100 years. Some Hyuga had even argued that it was impossible in the first place. Of course Hanabi had proved them wrong by using the technique against Hinata and during her missions. At first their techniques were equally matched and they exchanged blows without managing to break through the other's defense. But as Hiashi came out of his trance Hanabi continued, hitting him with incredibly fast strikes, disabling his Tenketsu, and finally sending deadly chakra spikes into his inner organs. Thanks to his Byakugan Hiashi could watch her as she destroyed his kidneys, his liver and finally his heart. When Hiashi fell to his knees, he looked up towards his daughter. Hanabi didn't let any emotion show on her face, but a single tear rolled down her cheeks. With difficulty he turned his head towards Hinata, who stared back, then lowered her gaze to the ground with a hurt look in eyes. As he drew his last breath he didn't feel hate or resentment towards his daughters, only pride. They had grown up into strong women indeed, capable of rebuilding the clan after all his failures. Hiashi Hyuga fell forward, face first into the dirt. Never to rise again. After her father was dead Hanabi wiped a single tear from her face and turned to the remaining main family fighters. "Now to you. Anyone who supported my father's revolt and killed at least one branch family member using the cage bird seal after I abolished it will face their just punishment. Death." On another part of the battlefield, Naruto and his path stood in front of Danzo, eyeing him critically. "How are you still alive? I know I killed you, just like I did several years ago. You know nothing. I can't be killed. I am destined to lead the shinobi world to peace." Naruto said nothing, but around them many alliance shinobi started laughing at the old man. The blonde emperor shook his head. "You won't. But you will be remembered as the maniac who almost caused the destruction of Konoha." "Never." Danzo threw a wind jutsu only for it to be blocked by a barrier created by Naruto's barrier path. "Stand aside, Emperor." Naruto regarded the approaching Raikage with an icy glare but still fell behind the alliance leader. Mizukage Mei, who trailed behind looked towards him apologetically. Naruto was definitely going to give the Raikage a piece of his mind about this treatment later, but for now the unity of the alliance was more important. "Hokage Danzo. You have terrorized the lands of the members of this alliance. For that I, as the alliance leader, will take your head personally." Danzo wordlessly unwrapped the bandages from his left eye. Finally he revealed a red Sharingan eye and a gasp was heard among the alliance. "You're wrong, Raikage. I will kill you and as many of Konoha's enemies as I can. Give us some space." All around the Raikage and Danzo the alliance shinobi backed further away, creating a more than 100-meter large circle. Naruto briefly approached instead. "Careful, Raikage. That man managed to bring two of the legendary Sannin under his control, using that Sharingan. And there is something going on with his right arm. My eyes can see a strange chakra surrounding it. Maybe it has something to do with his ability to seemingly come back to live." Danzo's right arm Naruto was mentioning had been kept hidden by a long sleeve on his white clothes for the entirety of the encounter so far. The Raikage nodded and looked towards Naruto expectantly. The blonde complied with the unspoken command and left the designated location of the duel. It was no fool and an incredible shinobi. He avoided looking into Danzo's Sharingan eye and focused on the rest of his body instead. Then he activated his trademark jutsu. Lightning-style armor. The electricity boosted his speed and reflexes even above their already incredible levels. When he charged, Danzo had trouble following his movements, even with the Sharingan. The old hawk threw a wind jutsu and tried to get away from the Raikage. But the muscular man was just too fast. He evaded Danzo's jutsu without a problem, caught up to him and struck once, jamming his lightning-empowered hand right through the Hokage's heart. Danzo tried to grab onto the Raikage, but his limbs quickly lost any power and he crumpled to the ground. The dark-skinned man didn't relax though and carefully watched his surroundings. Sure enough, soon Danzo's remains disappeared and he reappeared completely fine on the battleground. "Your trick is quite impressive, Hokage. I wonder just how many times you can do that." "You would be surprised, Raikage." Without another word charged again directly at Danzo. The old man put a kunai at his right sleeve and ripped it off when was only a short distance away. "Let's see if you can avoid looking into these." Danzo ripped his right sleeve off, revealing a gray-colored wooden-looking arm with 10 Sharingan eyes embedded into it. About half of them were closed, but the others looked around, proving they were functional. A fell for Danzo's ruse that the implanted Sharingan were capable of putting gain jutsu on him, and so he turned his head away, giving the Hokage the opening he needed. One more touch on the Raikage's skin and the seal he had started when the Raikage had killed him was complete. Glowing tendrils appeared on the dark-skinned man's skin, restricting his movements. Naruto wanted to intervene, but he was held by a Kumo shinobi who believed in his Raikage's victory. Danzo grabbed A's head, forced his eyes open and looked directly into them. It took only 2 seconds before Danzo stepped back and undid the seal. The Raikage didn't attack. "Kill all enemies of Konoha." I nodded. "Shit." Naruto immediately sprang into action, shaking off the now stunned Kumo shinobi, and his path spread out on the battlefield. The possessed Raikage charged right at Mei Terumi, his lightning armor giving him incredible speed. The Mizukage knew that she didn't stand a chance in close combat and she would never get away from the incredibly fast man. As a desperation move she prepared to use her specialty lava, without even knowing if it would kill the allied leader or if it wouldn't stop him at all. Just before she was forced to release the jutsu, was suddenly yanked backwards, sailing through the air helplessly. He was being pulled towards Naruto, who stood about 100 meters away with one arm outstretched, Rinnegan active. But the Raikage never reached Naruto as about halfway the giant fist of a 10-meter tall earth elemental pounded him into the ground. Only moments later the rock creature's arm shattered as air retaliated. "Ino Shikachodami." The three mentioned shinobi were at Naruto's side in an instant. Meanwhile Naruto's paths were fighting Danzo. "Ino, can you disable him?" "Not like this. He is too strong mentally. I might be able to do it if I can touch him directly." "Good. Shikamaru, Choji, you two help me restrain him." While Choji grew dramatically in size and Shikamaru sent out his shadow tendrils towards Danzo summoned a giant monster, a Baku. It was a strange creature with the trunk of an elephant and it immediately started using it to suck in everything in its surrounding. Naruto's barrier path managed to protect the Alliance shinobi Konoha with his barrier jutsu, but more and more ground was sucked up around the Baku, and it was only a matter of time until it would cause even more problems. "May, can you take care of that thing? I'll go after Danzo." The Mizukage nodded and prepared her signature jutsu, while the Naruto path who had addressed her concentrated on the old Hokage himself together with the other paths. The old man didn't fare well at all, as the clones could coordinate perfectly using their shared vision. While the elemental path used a giant fire elemental to corner Danzo, the pre-top path skewered the old man with a metallic tendril from behind through his chest. Once again the body of Danzo vanished and he reappeared unharmed on the battlefield. Though the paths noticed that the old man began to tire and that one of the Sharingan eyes on his arm which was open before was now closed. Meanwhile Lei had completely destroyed Naruto's elemental. With a backhanded strike he sent the gigantic Choji flying and even broke his arm. But then he was encompassed by Shikamaru's shadows and seconds later by Gaara's sand, who had come to help. Finally Naruto helped them, too, by pushing a few of his chakra rods into the Raikage's limbs, pushing his own chakra into the man. That messed Ai's chakra well enough to keep him from moving. "Now you know." The girl approached the Raikage and quickly put her right hand on his forehead, closing her eyes. A few seconds passed and then she scrunched her face and put her second hand next to the first, with a concentrated and worried expression on her face. The Raikage still struggled, but he was held too tight. It took a while, but then Ai's expression softened and he fell unconscious, while Ino had a smug look on her face. "I did it. I beat the goddamn Sharingan. He should be alright once he wakes up." Kumo shinobi quickly got their Raikage away from the fighting to the medics, while Shikamaru, Choji and Ino turned their attention to the still ongoing fight. Danzo just couldn't keep up with the Naruto paths. They attacked him from all directions, perfectly coordinated and knew tons of jutsu. The worst thing was that they didn't seem to run out of steam at all while he was on his last leg. He dodged another punch from a giant fire elemental and attacked a path using wind jutsu-powered kunai. The weapons uselessly bounced from a barrier appearing in midair long before they hit their target. He heard a familiar whooshing sound and whirled around, blocking dozens of kunai coming from another Naruto he hadn't been aware of beforehand. Suddenly the Naruto vanished. The knowledge that that was the original didn't help Danzo at all as Naruto appeared right behind him and put a kunai through his neck. Once more the body vanished and once more the old man reappeared unharmed on the field of battle. But now Danzo was completely exhausted and the reality of the situation slowly became clear to him. Mei had used her lava jutsu and quickly got rid of his poor summon, and the Raikage had been subdued, too. He was surrounded by Naruto and his paths, who he just couldn't beat in an all-out battle. A short look towards his right arm showed him that the last Sharingan embedded into it had just closed, robbing him of his trump card. He was finished. Moving past his paths, who carefully watched their enemy, Naruto strode forward and unsealed another of the 3 Uzumaki swords, the one he had kept for himself. "I noticed that one after another the Sharingan on your arm closed and didn't open again. Maybe you can revive yourself once more with your right eye, but that's it, isn't it? And I doubt you can do even that. It looks like you are out of chakra. Damn you, you little brat. You have no clue how long I have been waiting for this moment. Now you'll pay for what you have done." With a quick kick he brought Danzo to his knees and raised his sword above the man's head. "I'll take you with me." Danzo tore open his robe and revealed his chest. A black seal appeared on it, which soon started spewing ink. And suddenly Danzo and Naruto were surrounded by a black sphere. "This is all your fault. You could have been my tool, and together we would have brought peace to the shinobi world. Now there is only death for the both of us. I'll pass." Naruto appeared next to Hinata in a blink, about 100 meters away from Danzo. She had come over from the Hyuga Elder's execution grounds to watch the rest of the fight. They watched together as the black sphere around Danzo first expanded and then tore the Hokage to shreds with his own jutsu. What an idiot. Hinata nodded and leaned on to her husband, not taking her eyes off the dying Danzo for an instant. Naruto put an arm around her. "It is finally over." With Danzo's death, the few remaining specks of resistance by Konoha shinobi were finally broken and the Alliance's victory was complete. The Leaf Village was free at last. All in all, only about 3,000 men and women had lost their lives during the battle, which was a small miracle in itself due to the size of it. Only a bit less than half of those were actually shinobi and samurai. The other 1,500 were civilians and bandits Danzo had drafted into his army. Among the well-trained fighters, Konoha had suffered the bigger casualties, too. Over 1,000 Leaf shinobi lay dead on the battlefield. The Alliance had only lost 350 men, which was a great success since everyone had expected a much higher number. This was both due to the Alliance's attempt to capture rather than kill their enemies, as well as the group of Konoha officers who had caused large portions of the Konoha army to surrender ahead of time. Since the battle was so successful, Naruto used his teleportation seals to get the adequate supplies for such an occasion. Barrels upon barrels of beer and other booze. The Alliance army celebrated together in their camp right outside of Konoha, even a few Leaf Shinobi joined in, mostly those who had opposed Danzo. Late in the evening a shaky-looking Kiba arrived, supported by his sister after he had been freed from prison. Hinata and Shino gave their long-lost teammate a hearty welcome, and together they celebrated until the sun came up. It had been only 2 days since the battle for Konoha. Most of the Alliance army had already been sent home, but a small occupation force remained in control of the village to oversee the selection of a new Hokage. Raikage had woken up only 1 day after coming under Danzo's control during the battle. He had no memory of the event, but apart from that he was fine. As soon as he was released he took over the Alliance leadership again, after that role had been filled by Naruto and Mei during his short recovery. In contrast to that, Tsunade as well as Jiraiya, who had been under the effects of the jutsu far longer, had fallen into a coma after Danzo's death. The Yamanaka diagnosed that it would take a while for them to wake up, even though the Sharingan's influence was gone. The 2 Sannin had been moved to a hospital within the empire to give them the best treatment possible, and Konoha had no way to refuse. There they were taken care of by Shizune and Sakura, who had permanently moved into the empire. Hinata stepped out of the Hokage tower into the streets of Konoha. She was exhausted. The Alliance leaders had spent the last day discussing the future of the Leaf Village. Luckily Naruto, Hinata and Gaara had convinced the others not to take unreasonable reparations from the already crippled village, and the Alliance would leave the decision about the next Hokage to the Fire Daimyo, just like it had always been. Hinata. The girl looked up surprisedly and recognized her former sensei Kurenai. The woman hurried close to her and immediately fell to her knees. Hinata, I am glad to finally meet you. I know it has been a long time, but I am so sorry about what happened after you helped Naruto. If I had known about Danzo I shouldn't have told him. The Emperor smiled at her former teacher and helped her up. It is alright Kurenai-sensei. I didn't know what was going on back then either. You couldn't have known that Lady Tsunade was being controlled by Danzo. Still I am really sorry Hinata. Hinata opened her arms and Kurenai gladly accepted the hug, pulling her former student close. After a while the two broke apart again. There is someone I would like you to meet. She motioned towards a tall black-haired man and an about 6-year-old girl. You already know my husband Asuma, and that is my daughter Kira. At the same time Naruto got an overdue apology of his own. Still up in the Hokage tower, a certain silver-haired Jonin had finally managed to meet with his former student. Now Kakashi Hatake bowed apologetically front of the young emperor, with Sakura standing close by. Naruto, I have been a complete fool and a bad sensei. I should have never believed Danzo. Naruto watched the Jonin critically, not looking happy at all. Do you think you can ever forgive me, Naruto? I am not sure, Hatake. But Naruto. Sakura didn't understand why Naruto remained so reserved. You forgave even me without a second thought after all the things I said about you. Why can't you forgive our sensei? This is different, Sakura. You have no idea what he did to me. Naruto remained firm and Kakashi was honestly devastated. But he could understand Naruto's reasoning. While Sakura had still been very young and even got manipulated by her own mother, Kakashi didn't have any excuse for his actions at all. And even worse, the Jonin had let out his frustrations on Naruto back when he had been taken captive. Because of that Naruto was not inclined to forgive his former sensei at this point in time. I heard that Sasuke vanished during the battle, Sakura. What happened? Instead of continuing to discuss his relationship with his former sensei, Naruto rather steered the discussion into a different direction. It was strange. He was suddenly engulfed by a black vortex and vanished. It looked a bit like your Kamui, sensei. Shikamaru asked around your allies for me and it seems nobody knows anything. Maybe one of the other nations kidnapped him to gain access to the Sharingan. The look Naruto sent to his former teacher was devastating and Sakura got worried. But then Naruto relaxed a bit. As much as I hate to admit it, it is a possibility. But if you inconvenience an innocent member of the Alliance during your investigation there will be hell to pay, Hatake. The silver-haired Jonin nodded somberly. Several hours later Konohamaru stood alone at the grave of his grandfather Hiruzen Sarutobi. He was deep in thought, so he was quite surprised when suddenly someone close by spoke up. He was a great man and like a father to me. Konohamaru looked up to see Naruto standing next to him. Hey boss. Hi Konohamaru. The two of them stood in comfortable silence at the grave for a while, both in their own thoughts about the old man. Eventually Konohamaru turned away and Naruto followed. So how have you been since this whole mess with Danzo started? I have been doing alright. I got promoted to Jonin 2 years ago. Naruto almost laughed. He knew for a fact that Konohamaru had been in Anbu for 3 years now, but that was something that was meant to be a secret, of course. I heard you organized the surrender of a large chunk of the Konoha troops. I just had to do something to prevent Danzo from taking all of us with him. Still, convincing all those people is quite an accomplishment for your age. Konohamaru stopped in front of 2 graves, and Naruto's eyes went wide when he read the names. His voice croaked when he asked. How did this happen? The mission gone sour just a few weeks before the invasion. It was no one's fault really. Just bad luck. Naruto nodded and silently stared at the graves of Mogi and Yuden. When he had seen them last they had still been children, and now they were dead. Luckily for Konohamaru, Naruto didn't recognize the date of their deaths as the day he and Hinata had infiltrated Konoha. The 2 shinobi remained standing there in silence for a whole hour, with Naruto sometimes asking questions about the deceased teenagers until they finally turned away from the graves. Hey Konohamaru, if there is something you need or if you need someone to talk to, I'll be there for you, alright? Thanks boss. I'll keep it in mind. Naruto smiled at his old friend and the 2 left the graveyard together. So you know you guys need a new Hokage. With Grandma Tsunade still being unconscious and people wanting a new start and all. Konohamaru nodded. Well, I have been thinking about who I should recommend as the next Hokage to the Fire Daimyo. I think you would do great, Konohamaru. Konohamaru Sarutobi stared at his old friend in surprise. Don't you think I am a bit too young for that, still? Naruto chuckled. A couple of years ago both he and Konohamaru would have jumped at such an opportunity. Just that question shows that you have grown up a lot, Konohamaru. Besides, you will have plenty of people to help you make the right calls. Besides, I think the general population would easily support you. You symbolize both a fresh start since you are so young, as well as a return to former glory due to your grandfather. I'll have to think about that, boss. I don't want to mess things up even more due to inexperience. Sure. Maybe you should talk with Shikamaru. He is not called a genius for nothing. If you decide to do it, I bet he will help you find advisors that make sure that nothing like that does happen. Just like he and Hinata do for me. The 2 of them continued to talk for a while longer until Naruto had to attend to another meeting with the other leaders. They had to plan for the upcoming arrival of the Fire Daimyo in Konoha. Sasuke Uchiha woke up in a dark room. Over him stood a lean man with black clothes and an orange spiral mask. My name is Madara Uchiha. It is time you learn the truth about your brother. Obito. The tall man with a long black mane and 2 red Sharingan eyes entered the room. He wore blood-red samurai armor. Stop using my name. Since Sasuke had seen the giant statues at the Valley of the End, there was no room for doubt. This was the real Madara Uchiha. In a small corner of the underground complex lay the remains of one Nagato Uzumaki, the former Pain. After many months of manipulation from Obito's Sharingan, the mind of the once powerful man had been broken, and he had used his Rinnegan and given his life to resurrect the strongest of all Uchihas. On the balcony of the Hokage Tower, overlooking Konoha, stood Naruto. He was lost in thought until he heard the door leading to the balcony open. He turned around and saw Hinata and their children coming towards him. Hitomi walked together with Hinata and Minato for a few meters, and then she suddenly decided to sprint towards him. Daddy. Naruto laughed and picked up the 5-year-old girl and raised her high into the air, to which she squealed in delight. Hey there, little one. Hitomi beamed at her father, and then she noticed the strange headwear on him. What are you wearing, Daddy? Realization hit Naruto, and he carefully put down his daughter. Then he sent an apologetic glance towards Hinata, who put her hands on her hips. You know you could cause a diplomatic incident with that, Naruto. He rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment, but then Hinata's face lit up and she quickly gave him a peck on his cheek. I am just messing with you, Naruto. I am sure nobody will complain. At least as long you don't do it in public. Naruto quickly nodded his confirmation that he would never do that. Oh no, what is mommy talking about, Daddy? Both children looked up to their father questioningly. Naruto smiled brightly, picked up Minato and put him on his shoulder, then he put a hand on Hitomi's shoulder and directed them to look over the village with him. Hinata joined them. When I was still living here I promised that I would eventually become the leader of this village to protect everyone living here. This hat is the symbol of being that leader, the Hokage. His children looked at him in awe. Does that mean you are Hokage now, too, Dad? Naruto chuckled. I wish. I put it on to feel like I have fulfilled that promise after all. But I can't be both Emperor and Hokage. That would make a lot of people very angry. Well, I think that's unfair. You should be allowed to be both. It really is not unfair, Hitomi. The people here deserve someone who can fully concentrate on making this village a better place for them. That is why I cannot become Hokage. Hinata gave Naruto a quick peck on his cheek to show him how proud she was of him for having matured so much. So who wants ramen? As the children squealed in delight, Hinata smacked her hand against her forehead. Her pride of Naruto utterly destroyed by his bad eating habits, which he had managed to pass on to his children. Citizens of Fire Country. Loyal subjects. A few days had passed. Now the daimyo of Fire Country stood on the balcony of the Hokage Tower. But this time the plaza below was filled to the brim with Konoha shinobi and civilians alike. Behind him stood the 7 leaders of the Alliance Army. Mei, Naruto, Hinata, Gaara, Mifune and Inoki. I present to you. Your 6th Hokage. Since Danzo had never had an official inauguration and his face was not on the Hokage monument, everyone had decided to just ignore his claim to that title. Konohamaru Sarutobi stepped forward to the side of the fire daimyo and looked over the large mass of people below. He was wearing the Hokage robes as well as the hat. From the crowd came loud cheering and applause for minutes until they slowly quieted down to let their new leader speak. People of Konoha. Immediately the crowd was completely silent. Everybody wanted to hear what their new Hokage had to say. For years our beloved 5th Hokage has been controlled by someone who stood against our very way of life. Where our ancestors favored freedom and individual strength, the betrayer preached mindless obedience and submission. He kidnapped the children of our clans and caused a rift between us and all other nations like never before, which ultimately was bound to lead to our downfall. An affirmative murmur came from the crowd. Just like the 1st Hokage, the 2nd Hokage and my grandfather, I intend to follow the very principles that helped make this village become what it was before Danzo's reign. I promise you that I will do everything in my power to make sure this village once again becomes a place known far and wide for its excellent shinobi. A place where our families can live safe and peacefully. And I will work hard so that other villages will trust us once again and stand by our side as allies, should we ever need them. With his last sentence he briefly nodded to the assembled leaders of the other villages and the empire. He then left a small dramatic pause. For the will of fire. His call was repeated by thousands of voices, by both civilians and ninja. 2 days later the new Hokage Konohamaru was walking home for the first time since his inauguration. 2 times in a row he had simply fallen asleep over his desk, with all the dots still. While making his way home he stopped and talked shortly to everyone who wanted a word with him. Lord Hokage. The voice had come from a small alley nearby and the intrigued Konohamaru rounded the corner cautiously. There were 6 men and 2 women waiting for him. Some of them belonged to the civilian council, but all of them were well-respected and wealthy civilians living in Konoha. All 8 of them bowed respectfully. What is going on here? Lord Hokage, we are a group of citizens that is very interested in the future well-being of Konoha. We mostly operate from the shadows, but we need your help. There is someone who has hurt and slandered our beautiful village and we want him brought to justice. Whom are you talking about? Konohamaru did in fact already have quite a good idea who they were talking about and what they were about to ask him to do. But sometimes feigning ignorance did have its benefits. The self-proclaimed Emperor Naruto Uzumaki, as well as his demon wench Hinata Uzumaki. Konohamaru couldn't resist to chuckle briefly. These people still refuse to acknowledge the connection between the 4th Hokage and the young emperor. And why would I help you? I would be endangering all of Konoha were I to be found out. Lord Hokage, we all have lost people dear to us during that cowardly attack on our beautiful village, as well as during the Alliance's invasion. Those deaths have to be avenged. We also heard that you lost 2 very close friends and we believe you wish to make sure justice is served just as we do. As to the danger involved. We are certain that we can help you to take them down without anyone ever finding out. Konohamaru nodded, signifying for the man to continue. Lord Hokage, please take a look at this. Someone handed Konohamaru a hexagonal bottle with a thick black liquid in it. What is this? That, Lord Hokage, is Nightbane. Possibly the last vial that exists in the elemental nations. It is a legendary poison whose formula has unfortunately been lost over time. Once it is ingested or absorbed by skin contact, it seeps into the victim's bones and slowly poisons them from the inside. It is completely odorless and tasteless and almost impossible to discover. The young Hokage's eyes lit up in surprise and he took a closer look at the vial. But this you can make sure the usurpers are being dealt with without anyone ever being able to find out. Years ago we used it on Itachi Uchiha before he left the village. We wanted to make sure that no other village could get their hands on the Sharingan. Unfortunately we only managed to get him with a very low amount which was dropped onto the handle on one of his kunai. He survived for years but eventually the poison wore him down. We do hope you could manage to slip a larger dose to our targets. Konohamaru nodded. How would I go about administering it? We heard you are to regularly meet with them. You could just slip this poison into their drink or food. Or you could even pour it onto the armrests of their seats. The possibilities are almost endless. I see. Crash. The bottle slipped from Konohamaru's hands and broke on the pavement. The black liquid formed a small puddle, but quickly drained into the earth. All members of the small secret society stared at the broken vial. Oh. I am very sorry this happened. Konohamaru feigned remorse over his mishap, but there was obvious mirth in his voice. Lord Hokage. This poison is the only of its kind. We have to save as much as we can. Konohamaru watched passively as the most foolish of the conspirators tried to save some of the liquid with his hands, poisoning himself in the process without doubt. Then two people tried to escape the alley as they had realized that skilled ninja like their Hokage didn't just drop things like a powerful poison. They were dead before they reached the corner. One of the women started to scream as she saw her co-conspirators die from kunai stabs into their necks. Why are you doing this, Hokage-sama? I have to rid this village of you traitors. You are too dangerous to be allowed to live. The civilians didn't stand a chance. When Konohamaru left the alley a few minutes later, Kakashi Hatake was waiting for him in the middle of the deserted street. Are they dead? Konohamaru nodded. He still had a bloody kunai in hand, which dripped its red coating onto the pavement. I know you did the right thing, Lord Hokage. Not giving in to hate and seeking revenge on Naruto is a sign that you are ready for your position. You overheard everything? Yes. I was tasked with your protection for today and thus overheard what was going on. But I was of the impression you didn't need my help. Konohamaru nodded. He hadn't even tried to call for reinforcements after all. To get back to your question. I don't seek revenge because I know Mogi's and Yuden's deaths were not Naruto's fault. He had no way to know who was behind those masks. To him they were just enemy ninja. Many people would not care about that. Well, I am not that stupid. Kakashi chuckled. I just wanted to say, Lord Hokage. If you need help with anything you do have my complete loyalty. Thank you. First of all, I am making the circumstances of the deaths of Mogi and Yuden an S-rank secret. If I get any say in the matter, Naruto will never find out. The experienced Jonin nodded. Naruto had to be familiar with the death of comrades and friends on the battlefield by now. But tragedies like this one had the potential to break anyone. And there is indeed something I could use your help with, Kakashi. I need a capable Anbu captain. Kakashi fell silent for a bit, then he nodded. If you really want me as your Anbu captain, I will try my best to meet your expectations in me, Lord Hokage. But first I want to make sure Danzo's accomplices get what they deserve. Bring Sakura Haruno's mother as well as the remaining members of the old civilian council in for questioning. Tell Ibiki he doesn't have to be gentle. Kakashi nodded. Is Elder Kahiru still in a coma? Yes, and Elder Hadaru died in the battle. Very well, apprehend just the civilian council for now then. And I need you to survey the current situation of our Anbu forces and make recommendations for new team arrangements as well as possible recruitments to refill our Anbu ranks by the end of the week. Yes, Lord Hokage. Oh, and have someone clean up the mess in that alley. Dismissed. Kakashi nodded and vanished with a shunshin, leaving behind a swirl of leaves. Konohamaru could finally make his way home. Naruto stood at the reception of the hospital he had left Itachi Uchiha in a few weeks ago. He was very irritated when the staff told him that Sasuke's older brother had simply vanished from his room one day. Naruto had been so sure Itachi would die in the hospital within a short time. He had just been 2 weeks after his attempt against Naruto, and the young emperor had been sure the ninja would never be able to even walk again. He had no idea what the disappearance of Itachi meant, but he had a very bad feeling about it. The end. So how was this part? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this part with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.